All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the Committee of the Whole budget meeting this evening. I think we have a fairly packed agenda for this evening once again, and we do have a few delegations as well this evening. I did want to start off by calling the meeting to order and welcoming all of you to this meeting this evening. I also wanted to just acknowledge that the meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin territories, and many of you are joining us from across the Algonquin Nation, and wanted to thank the Algonquin Nation for hosting this meeting on their land this evening. Tonight, we're also going to be joined by our 2020-21 student trustees, and we have Joy Louis, and who's a student at Colonel By Secondary School, and Charles Chen, who's a student at the Earl of March Secondary School. So this evening's meeting, really the purpose of tonight is to hear from delegations and to commence the debate on the 2021 staff recommended budget. I'd like to call on a mover to approve the agenda this evening. Thank you, Trustee Lyra. And I just wanted to ask if there's any changes to tonight's agenda. Okay, seeing none, I just call the vote. Those in favor? A reminder to either raise your hand or use the preference is to raise your hand using the function on Zoom. Thank you very much. Those opposed? Thank you. Any abstentions? Seeing none. That the agenda is approved for this evening. So if I move right into, I'm going to just ask, and this is a new format, but I'd like to ask if there's anyone with a possible conflict of interest, if you could please declare it at this time.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Trustee Campbell.
Thank you. I appreciate staff having helped me out with a prepared statement, which I'll read now into the record. Pursuant to Section 2 of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, I declare a potential indirect conflict of interest in the matter of any expenditures or revenues within the staff recommended budget related explicitly to both the Ottawa Go Club and SBCO and their interests in 440 Albert, the Rideau Hub, or OCNet. Should these specific matters be raised, I will recuse myself from any directly related debate or votes. I will not recuse myself from any other budget debate or votes. Further details are available in the Public Conflict of Interest Registry, available on the OCDSB website. And staff have the text.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. Are there any other declarations from trustees? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. And we'll move then to the next item on the agenda, our delegations. I do believe we have 2 delegations this evening. I'm not sure if there are any others that have signed up. If I can just get a signal perhaps from Manager Guthrie, if there's any other, anyone else that's signed up sort of at the last minute. If not, then we have two delegations for this evening, and we'll start with Lily Miller. Is Ms. Miller with us this evening?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
So Ms. Miller, you'll have 4 minutes for your delegation this evening.
Okay. As you know, there is tremendous racism embedded in law enforcement. And let's not be naive, that means the Ottawa Police too. Black, Indigenous, and people of color have always known but we rarely speak of it. And now you know it, and the parents know it. And until the police fix their systemic racism problem, they must not interact with our students. So I'm calling for an end to the SRO program. I'm calling for the full-time employment and funding by the board of the police in the OCDSB high schools to end. And I'm calling for police presence as a behavior tool to end. So the modus operandi of the police is intimidation. And that works for certain things, but I don't believe it belongs in school. And I don't believe that the OCDSB believes it either. What the kids do need is the culture of caring. They need professionals in de-escalation, conflict management, mental health counseling for children and youth, and all monies earmarked for the Ottawa Police need to be directed to these services. These professionals would help so many students who are struggling with mental health issues, which then causes problems like school refusal, aggression, oppositional behavior, self-harm, etc. So let's address the root of the problem rather than reacting to the symptoms. In elementary schools, police officers come for various reasons, career day, bullying, and behavioral issues, and they are fully armed when they come into the school. Their guns are within a few feet of children who obviously are fearful of the guns, and rightly so. That's what we teach them. So how is it okay that guns have been permitted in the schools? A trained professional counselor is a sensible alternative. And what if you don't act? I know we have a lot going on right now, but if you don't act, what message are you sending to the parents and to the students? Are you saying we know there's racism in law enforcement, but we don't care? Or are you saying we've heard from the Black, Indigenous, and students of color that they've been racially profiled and mistreated by police in our schools, but we don't care? If you don't act, are you saying we know there's systemic racism in law enforcement, but we're going to continue to use them in our schools? And consider, are you saying to the white parents and students, there's no racism problem? Don't worry about it. So maybe you don't believe there's a problem, but there really is a systemic racism problem with law enforcement. You are entrusted with the education and care of the students, and you are educating them with your inaction. So there's times when the police need to be called, and there has to be strict protocols before police are permitted to interact with racialized students. We can't go back. This has happened. Everybody knows it. We can't unsee what we've seen. I expect change. The students expect change, and the parents expect change. So I urge you, do not sweep this under the rug. The police presence affects racialized students, and it affects the white onlookers to the interactions. Please remove the police from schools.
Thank you very much for your delegation this evening. I will turn to trustees if there are any questions. I see one question from Trustee Bill. Go ahead, Trustee Bill.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Lily, for bringing this to the board. My question has to do with, you talk about the evidence that is in front of us, that we know that police enforcement in our schools has been affecting racialized communities for some time. And I do know, I'm aware that there are reports out there that have investigated outside of the Ottawa bubble. Are you familiar with specific reports or maybe some sort of outreach to students to find out within our board itself? And maybe this isn't a question for Lily, maybe this is a question for staff as well. Have we undertaken that research on the effects of the SROs in our school?
I don't know if you were on the last Indigenous Education Advisory Council meeting, but the students there, the youth, did bring up some examples of how it happens. And here's the problem, is that when a racialized person is mistreated, generally you don't speak up because you are put down. You've been put down all your life. And as an Indigenous person, what rings in my head is the angry Indian, right? So, and you know, any other culture, they have, not everyone is a strong, independent person to come and speak up for themselves. So you just try to survive in this white world, and the parents are doing their best, and you know, parents don't want to rock the boat either. So if you haven't had reports, it's not because there's nothing to report. Okay.
Thank you.
Very much, Ms. Miller. I will turn then to Trustee Evans. Sorry, Trustee Lyra. Go ahead. Sorry, Trustee Lyra, you're on mute.
And somebody unmute my phone.
Trustee Evans, you're, I don't know if it's your system. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. So my question to Lily is, you've expressed these sentiments. Do you think it is fair to say that those were the sentiments at IAC? Because a lot of people here weren't on that meeting. And so do you think it is fair to say that that was the gist of the community's opinion?
No, there was divided opinion. I noticed that the older members preferred status quo, and the younger members requested change. I know change is hard, and you being board members, I know it's hard to change directions. And I understand that from some people, but I hope that the board is not going to be a follower. You're going to wait until all the other boards take action before you take action. I hope that this board is going to be a leader.
Thank you very much. I see no further questions from trustees. So thank you very much for your delegation this evening, Lily.
Thank you.
And appreciate you coming out this evening to speak with us. Next up, we have Carolyn Kropp for a 2-minute delegation.
Carolyn's not here yet.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we'll have to move on in the agenda then. We don't have any other delegations this evening. So perhaps when Ms. Kropp joins, we can, if trustees can find some time or if an agreement, we can proceed with allowing her to do her 2-minute delegation. Unless someone has any issues with that, we'll move along in our agenda then. Yes, Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is not a matter of concern about the delegations, but I wonder, since we have a number of new faces around the meeting tonight, whether it would be possible to do a quick round of introductions for everybody so that we understand who some of our new non-voting representatives are, and also we'll have an opportunity to welcome our new student trustees.
That's a wonderful idea. So why don't we start with formally, I did acknowledge that our student trustees were with us this evening, but it would be great to see them on the screen and to formally welcome them to the table. I can't see them all since I've got multiple screens going on here, but Joy, perhaps you just want to do a little wave and welcome. I see you there, Joy. Hi. Welcome to the table. And if you and remember, you have if you have any questions either for delegations or if you have any questions of staff as reports are being are being tabled, by all means, you are an active trustee as well, and you should feel free to raise your hand as well. And do we have Charles with us too? There's Charles. Great. Nice to see you. And same with you. If you have any questions at all this evening, do feel free to raise your hand along with the other trustees to ask questions. So I know we've got several participants and certainly some folks that we've met before. Any new faces around the table? If you want to raise your hand, I'll call upon each of you to quickly introduce who you're with and who you're representing. And again, I'll mention that the raise hand button is just if you click actually in to participants, you'll see it come up in a separate sort of split screen. And you'll see at the very left hand, a blue raise hand, and you can raise your hand that way. Just because I can't see everybody who's with us. Trustee Scott, I'm not sure how to proceed here with your suggestion.
I was just going to suggest that if all of the non-voting representatives put their hands up, then you can see who's who in the participants list and just call on each one of them to introduce themselves very briefly.
Even better idea. All right, wonderful. So we have Corinne. Oh, you're on mute, Corinne.
Hi, Corinne Lassaline, OSSTF, President for Professional Educators and Childcare Staff.
Perfect, welcome. And Troy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Troy Clough. I'm the president of the Plant Support Staff Unit. So I represent custodians, maintenance workers, and kitchen cafeteria workers.
Thank you. And I do remember you were with us at the last meeting, and we were remiss at that time to have new people identify themselves. So we have David Wildman.
Hi, I'm David Wildman. I represent the elementary occasional teachers.
Welcome, David. And Rob, I mean, we've seen you around the table several times, Rob, but please do introduce yourself.
So hi, it's Rob Kerwin from SEAC, and I've got a TV going, a laptop going, and my smartphone going. And if I lose you on all three, I don't know what I'm going to do, but anybody who spent time with me around SEAC knows that I am very challenged this way. But looking forward to this evening and I guess Thursday as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Melody.
I'm Melody. I represent OSSTF Educational Support Workers, which are office clerical and technical staff that work for the board.
Well, thank you. Sue Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. Susan Gardner. I am the president-elect, actually. I begin on September 1st of the Ottawa-Carleton Elementary Teachers Federation, members of OCDSB. Thanks.
Welcome. Jennifer Capitani.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Capitani. I'm the principal at Lakeview Public School, and I'm representing the principals and vice principals from our board.
Terrific, thank you. And Jean?
Hi, I'm Jean Trant. I represent the educational assistants and the early childhood educators.
Thank you. We've got Jennifer Glassman and also a request from our newest trustee, Trustee Bill. If you could please spell out your acronym. So if you could let us know what the acronym actually stands for, that would be helpful as well. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Glassman. I represent the OSSTF PSSP, professional staff, psychologists, social work, speech and language therapists at the board.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Kelly? whom we've also seen around the table many times.
Ellie Grana, I'm the president of the secondary OTs.
Ellie, and we've got Ms. Handela.
Hi, I'm Malika. I am the co-chair of the Ottawa-Carleton Assembly of School Councils, and I represent the voice of parents and parent councils.
Much, and again, another member we've seen for the last while as well. So I believe that's it for all of the non-voting and new members or not so new members around the table. Thanks very much. I don't know whether we've now got our next delegation, Ms. Crop, if she's arrived yet. Manager Guthrie, I don't know whether she's in attendance yet.
She is not in attendance yet, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on in the agenda then, as we do have the staff who will be presenting the recommended budget this evening. As you all know, this is a continuation of the meeting that we held on the 21st of July. And at that time, staff provided an overview of report 20-063 and presented the staff recommended budget at that time. Since that time, of course, we've had additional information being provided to us by the province and additional funds that were being identified. And so I am anticipating, of course, this evening that we'll have a very thorough update on that and what the province was announcing and what it means for our district. I also just want to take a moment and really deeply thank staff for all the work that they've done over the course of the last several weeks and frankly the last several months. Before I call upon the director to present this evening's report and staff recommended budget, I really did want to take a moment publicly and acknowledge that I think many of us have felt anxious and overwhelmed and frustrated, but by no means is that taken out on staff. We know staff have been working around the clock, both to get us a recommended budget, to bring forward a return to school plan based on what the province was indicating just a few weeks ago with directives coming from the province. And I really did want to thank, on behalf of all the trustees, wanted to thank staff for all of the hard work that they've put in. I know that many families have a number of questions still, as do trustees, but just really want to assure our public, our parents and students that we represent, that we have the best interests of students in mind. And staff have been thinking about a student-first approach all along, and it's deeply, deeply appreciated by the trustees and by parents that I've spoken with. So without further ado, I will turn over to Director to introduce this agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, we do appreciate the comments that you've made in regards to the reopening work, as well as the work as it pertains to this budget, because the two certainly are interconnected, as trustees have made us very, very aware, and have also communicated to the public their interest in ensuring that the needs of our student are reflected in the budget that comes forward. So your remarks are well appreciated, Chair Schwartz. Tonight we continue with the OCDSB deliberations around the staff recommended budget for 2020-2021 school year. As everyone is well aware, and Chair has raised it as well, there have been several provincial announcements since the presentation of the budget documents on the 21st of July. The ministry announced its plan to proceed with the reopening of schools. It also included additional funding to school districts to support a safer return to school for students and for staff. So CFO Carson will have additional information as to the amounts we received and the current plans to use those dollars. But trustees will also see in the packages that were attached, the appendices that were attached to the report today, that there is an outline of the memo that was received from the ministry, as well as a number of charts that outline some of what you will hear. The provincial plan included opening of elementary schools on a full-time basis, secondary schools on a part-time basis, and requires boards to ensure parents have the option to have their students educated remotely if they choose the latter option. Over the last 2 weeks, staff has worked with the guidance provided by the ministries not only of education, but also Ministry of Health, and of course with local health experts to develop information that can be shared with parents and the community, as well as with our own staff regarding our plans for welcoming students beginning on September the 3rd. These plans were released yesterday, and as we have mentioned, it will be monitored. The release of the information will continue to be monitored and responding to questions as they arise, as there have been many questions, and parents and families are faced with significant and serious decisions to be made. We are not here to present a plan in detail tonight, but wanted to highlight some of the principles that follow the development of the plan, safety of students and staff, and the ability to work with public authorities in the event of confirmed COVID cases on outbreaks. And so that is one of the key questions that not only has informed our work to date, but will continue to inform our work because that continues. The realities of COVID-19 continue to be a reality in our community as well as in our school. One of the other guiding principles in the development of the plan is a commitment to ensuring as much as possible that we can continue to support and improve student achievement and well-being. And I have some additional comments pertaining to well-being shortly. We continually looked at our ideas and processes that are existing to see what were in fact working within the district's culture of innovation, caring, and social responsibility. It is important to note that we have looked at this daily while considering the divergent needs of our communities in Ottawa, whether geographic, cultural, or racial. We're committed to doing the best that we can to make sure that the plans support those who need the support the most. The plan will be implemented, keeping our focus on equity at the forefront of our daily decision making. A plan has been developed that, while not perfect, can get schools open in September. And I think we can recognize that as we continue to learn, there are aspects of this plan which will continue to need improvement. Trustees have already indicated an expectation that we will continue to discuss the plan, the implementation, and recalibrate over the course of the fall months and perhaps into the winter as well, as this item will continue to be a standing item for trustee discussion. Our focus has been on developing not only a plan that brings students back safely, but also reduces the risks to students and staff. We believe that the plan that we shared yesterday allows us to form part of the ongoing community response to the pandemic. The reopening of schools is a vital part of the city's response and will also address other related issues in the community. We've talked about equity as a driver for the plan. It is also a driver for our budget decisions. Our community to equity is embedded in the decisions and recommendations, not only with the reopening plan, but the recommendations for our budget. And I'd like to remind trustees and our non-voting partners who are part of the discussion today, as well as our public, that when we consider resource allocation as a decision, it is only useful when we allocate resources into a context of conditions and structures and practices that support the commitments. And I raise this simply because allocating funds is not a solution. It is a support to some of the solutions that are available to us. But we need to bear in mind not only the resource allocation, but also the conditions that we support. all aspects of equity. With all aspects of equity, we work from a presumption of capacity and potential. Otherwise, we are presuming a weakness instead of a strength. And this is something that was important for me to highlight because we are going into a new norm. We're going into a new school year that not only represents a new norm from the point of view of health and safety and remote learning, but also from the point of view of equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and anti-oppression. We're going into a new norm, knowing that we must build on the strengths of our students and staff to secure the conditions where mental health and well-being will thrive. And with your indulgence, Chair Schwartz, may I ask for 3 minutes for Dr. Duchner just to speak to that piece around the mental health, because trustees have made it very clear that it is a priority through the questions that have been asked, and the public has made it clear that this is a priority, and ministry funding has essentially spoken to it as a priority. So from the perspective of conditions, I'd like to ask Dr. Duchner to add her voice just to this introduction with your indulgence. I can't see her, but I'm told that she is here. So Dr. Duchner, if I can turn it to you, and would you mind turning on your camera if you can?
Thank you, Madam Director. And yes, I am here and my camera is on. Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm very happy to take a couple of minutes to speak about the conditions that need to be in place to really maximize the mental health and well-being of our students as we look at our return to school in the fall. As we consider a return to school this year, we really need to look at those conditions within the context of what has been going on for the last 6 months. The pandemic, together with world events that have led to the mobilization for racial justice, have really increased the awareness of inequities and have had an impact on the mental health and well-being of individuals, families, and communities. Undoubtedly, all communities have experienced disruption, losses, and increased stress and anxiety, but we really need to understand that the life circumstances have been different across families and communities, and the impact of those circumstances have been disproportionate. And this will be evident in the way that our students present when they return to school. For example, many of our students will return to school actually feeling excited and optimistic, perhaps with some trepidation and worry. But for most of these students, they will adjust and adapt and thrive as they return to the familiarity of school routines in a safe and inclusive, supportive learning environment. Our more vulnerable students, though, for example, those with pre-existing or emerging mental health challenges, our students with special needs, our racialized students, our Indigenous students, students living in poverty, those that have been exposed to family conflict and violence, and those who've experienced death of a loved one over this period of time might need additional specialized support. So we can't follow a one-size-fits-all model because not all student experiences have been the same or have had the same impact on mental health and well-being. We really need to be careful and avoid pathologizing what are normal human emotions. Sadness, disappointment, worry, fear. That's what all of us have been feeling to one degree or another. We need to reinforce resilience in our students. We need to model resilience. We need to model healthy coping, because the best predictor of children's coping is adults coping. At the same time, we must also avoid diminishing the emotional impact that certain life circumstances and experiences have had, and ensure that appropriate supports are in place for those students. Certainly, we recognize that this is not our work alone, although schools are well positioned to promote mental health and well-being. Parents, of course, and community also have a pivotal role. So given that, we are working hard to be prepared to provide a continuum or a range of supports and services to meet the various needs of students and their families. For example, School Mental Health Ontario is putting together a toolkit, and learning support services staff are supplementing that toolkit for educators with strategies to help their work as they're building supportive environments and promoting and reinforcing social emotional learning skills. School-based staff will be receiving some training in supporting mentally healthy classrooms and in identifying signs of distress. The LSS clinical staff, so our psychology and social work staff, will be flexible and responsive and provide services, again, across a continuum, ranging from consultation and coaching to direct service through counseling, to facilitating access to community mental health supports, and also, of course, crisis intervention. There's ongoing community collaboration to ensure that we have a streamlined access to care. And there's information that's being gathered for parents. We're working together with Ottawa Public Health and again with School Mental Health Ontario to assist parents as they're working to support their students, their children's return to school. So with all of these different these plans and initiatives, we are optimistic that we are well positioned to be able to provide the right level of service at the right time for students as they return to school. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Duchner. And I will note that I said to Dr. Duchner 3 minutes, and you know, she certainly has stuck to that, because I know that given any more time, Dr. Duchner would have much more to say to us. Certainly a resource that has informed us, but we did feel important to bring this piece into the our introduction, because there are a lot of assumptions about what we think we know about mental health and well-being, and we certainly want to ensure, as we do with our commitment to equity and anti-oppression and anti-racism, that we want to be positioning the work that we take forward from an optimistic position built on a platform of an assumption of capacity, not on the assumption of deficit. And so I felt it was very important to include that in our introductory comments. So at this point, I do recognize that trustees are very anxious to get to the documents that have been presented for the discussion. And we have CFO Carson, who is here, who will lead us through that discussion. I will convey thanks, as Chair Schwartz has already done, to CFO Carson and his team, who have been working through some unusual circumstances and conditions themselves to get us here. And we also need to recognize, as has already been tabled, but for the record, the ongoing uncertainty, because we continually receive new information in a rhythm of time and timeliness that is very unusual to us. So that said, I would like to pass it to CFO Carson at this point to lead us through the conversation. CFO Carson.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I will try to keep my comments brief. And thanks for all the kind words. It just makes it that much more difficult. I have to lead off with an apology on our behalf. Apologies to Trustee Bell, Trustee Campbell. There were a series of questions that didn't get captured as in progress on our summary. They were back and forth over the course of the long weekend, and somehow I didn't forward them through to the group. Having said that, they didn't get captured in the summary, but I know we're working on them because we had discussions on many of those topics as recently as 3 hours ago. So we will have that information added to the package for Thursday night. My apologies for that. And in fact, in some cases, we will be able to address them orally this evening. I think it's important that I just recognize the contribution of my colleagues, not only in my departments, but in all of the others who were able to, especially Superintendent Janice McCoy, her folks in HR, in the middle of everything else that was going on, they were able to respond promptly to us. So we'll continue with this. The Q&As, as I said, we wanted to get you what we had tonight. And yesterday, when we looked at sending it out, we didn't have enough to make it worthwhile. It came together pretty quickly, and I believe we will be able to finalize the questions by Thursday evening. Before we move on, I just, again, in terms of general terms, I think we need to just recognize again that this is our most unusual year. We are trying to pass a budget that will provide us with the flexibility that will allow us to open schools, to monitor and to minimize risk, reduce risks, and allow us to change course as that's required. That is going to require more uncertainty than we have had in the past. It also means that there will probably be more in-year changes than we have seen in the past to a budget. We are continuing to look at our planning as the return to school plan was finalized on the weekend. And as we begin to get a little more information from the province about their plans for the funding that's been announced, and beginning to try to read the signs about what additional funding could be coming available later in the year. And so that work continues. We will be providing amended wording to the motion that will capture the authority to proceed with some of the funding that the province will be providing to us through a series of PPFs. That's the special purpose agreements that they have used. If I could draw your attention to one of the items that we have circulated, and I'll ask whether it's Kevin Gardner or Sandy Owens, if they could put up on the screen for us the presentation that we did last time. Mr. Gardner and his staff have added 3 pages that address the funding that was announced. And if we could bring that up, that would be great. And I'd like to jump right to page 17. Thanks, Kevin. The province announced a series of increase in funding to support a return to school. At that time, some of those dollars they announced would be allocated quickly. We have received notification of our share for some of the items. And on page 17 of this presentation, you'll see that so far, we know that we have an additional roughly $500,000 for technology-related costs. We have a further allocation for mental health supports of $199,000, and that is, in this version, it's shown twice. I apologize for that. We have enhanced dollars for cleaning supplies. That was about $140,000 is our share of that. We received approximately $1.8 million for additional custodial staffing support. We have $370,000 confirmed in terms of our training. There's nothing that's going to be more important than making sure all of our staff have been properly trained to as we work our way through the new protocols. We have we've got the additional supports for special education for $265,000, in addition to the one that we talked about for mental health. In these cases, I can tell you that we are working at looking how those dollars will deploy. We've had preliminary discussions with the federations, for example, on the custodial staff, without getting too far into the details of that. We have talked about the fact that it would be our intention to engage those staff to support as much as possible the daytime cleaning. $1.8 million, depending on how we allocate them, regular, part-time, casual, full-time. The length of the shift means that we do have some flexibility in how we can manage that to support additional daytime cleaning. It could be somewhere between 45 and 60 full-time equivalents. In terms of the additional supports in the spec ed and the mental health areas, I know Superintendent Simmons is looking at that. We are looking at how we can make sure that those dollars, that we make the best use of them and create some synergy with the dollars that were already committed in other parts of the budget. And so we have that as the committed dollars. Next page, Kevin, please. additional funding that has not yet been allocated, but has been identified, but has not been identified board by board, is shown here. The province, as I think we mentioned, can't remember if we mentioned it at July 21st, the province has directed that as much as possible, we attempt to obtain our masks and PPE through the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. Beginning back in April, they had begun a project to create their provincial stockpile based on what they thought would be needs in the health sector and in the broader public sector. We have submitted our first order for the month of September to them, and it would be our intention to continue with that. We expect that the cost of that, some of it is going to be absorbed directly by the province. The 2.1 million is an estimate of the inter-ministry transfer that should take place between the province and the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. In addition to that, there is PPE that we have already sourced and secured. We'd already gone ahead and got some specialized masks. We'd already secured a contract for reusable gowns, an ongoing linen contract to make sure that we had that in place for staff working with our most vulnerable students. So those costs are in our own budget. But we expect that if that is shared on a pro rata share based on students, we would expect to see somewhere around that $2.1 million in additional funding that will cover that cost. There is an additional allocation for mental health supports without any details. Again, if that's allocated to school board based on a proportion of enrollment, we would expect to see a further $875,000. We haven't heard from the province when that will be coming, but we are hopeful that we will see additional dollars sooner rather than later. And then there is a further amount available, the enhanced cleaning allocation. Beyond the first number, this is to identify those cleaning supplies that the ministry is hoping school boards that are having trouble sourcing supplies would acquire from the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. I will tell you that only some of our supplies are coming through there. We have established a reliable supply chain. It is, the products are not only the same quality as those being used in our area hospitals, our staff are trained in their use, and so we will be continuing with that. That means that we will be anticipating a grand total of approximately $8 million in funding beyond what we had expected when we developed this document, the recommended budget that was presented to you in July 21st. The other number that's unknown, and we have a footnote here, it was identified in the B memo, is they asked for, they said they were providing an additional $30 million for additional teachers to support boards where class size or supervision were issues. They placed a number of conditions around that. We haven't seen the final application forms and conditions, but one of the key ones was that a board has to have already budgeted for expenditures in excess of their 1%. That means that we are already in that category. The staff recommended budget took us into the area of about 1.95%. And so that, I think it's fair to say that that 30 million will not come on a proportionate basis as the others. And Superintendent McCoy, Superintendent Reynolds, and Simmons are all working together. The focus has been on teachers. We will also be looking at funding for some of the additional ECE positions that we've created, some of them to offset dollars that we are already committing there that might allow us to free up dollars should we see overages elsewhere in this budget process. I think it's also important that to note that, like the TDSB, we are taking the position that the dollars we have included in the budget for many of these expenditures and provisions are really only taking us to the enhanced level till December. since that's really when we get to the revised estimates. Until we've seen our experience in September to December, we've seen what works, what doesn't work. We have a better idea of what our overall enrollment figures are, and we have a better handle on a wide range of our expenditures. We don't want to make the mistake of being overly conservative, providing dollars for which we expect there is the likelihood of some ministry funding down the road. So it is a balancing act, but we will, we believe that these additional funds have made some progress for us as we go down the road. I can tell you we would have obviously preferred to see more clarity sooner. We would have preferred to see more funding. But having said that, we believe that these dollars supplementing the original amounts that we had in the overall budget will allow us to deliver that plan that you saw yesterday and to help us to open schools and minimize the risk to our students and staff, as well as provide an environment where real learning can in fact occur over the next 10 months. I think, Madam Chair, the only other item in this slide that we wanted to show, it was missing the last time, is the next one, page 19, Kevin, please. We wanted to show you that we are anticipating a surplus at the end of August 2020 of approximately $37 million. And that's a surplus that's available for compliance. What we are trying to do is, that assumes that we have a deficit in this year, and that will reduce the surplus that we had available at the beginning of 2019, 2020. We're not sure of where that number is going to land. We had expected that it would be somewhat lower than we had budgeted for, less than our 1%, that we thought it would be lower. But what we are looking at now is some of the expenditures that are having to be made now to prepare us for next year. So for example, we have a number of expenditures we've made over the course of the last 3 or 4 months ahead of time to prepare us for next year. What that means is that in some cases, it will reduce the need for expenditures next year. In some cases, it simply allowed us to take advantage of some underspending. An example is in facilities. We had purchased in April a container load of plexiglass acrylic so that we would have material available for our staff or for other fabricators as we begin to identify areas where we need physical barriers to help with infection control. We recently purchased another container load. Those are the kinds of expenditures that we would not usually make. And those are the expenditures that would normally be charged to the school year they're benefiting. We will be, as staff, taking a look at the accounting treatment of those items as we have a better understanding of our year-end position. And obviously, we will apply the timing and the accounting recognition of some of those expenses to the right period, but also using our professional judgment where we can to make sure that we are clearly stating the board's position and providing as much flexibility going forward. This slide simply shows that even if we were to incur the entire amount of the over expenditure that we've identified, the roughly $17.2 million, the board would still have in excess of $19 million in unappropriated surplus available for compliance. And it would, and that is the argument that we have made to the province. We have, through good decision-making, good management, the OCDSB has been fortunate to have these dollars available. And we believe this is the year that we should be making that commitment of those expenditures. So we want to just provide that additional background, Madam Chair, for the members of the committee. I don't know, I recognize the package was late getting to you today. I don't know that I would recommend going through the Q&As at this point unless there's specific clarification required. I think it would be probably most beneficial for us to hear if there are other questions that have arisen or been sparked by the answers that were provided, or by some of the comments that the director and Dr. Duchner and I have made this evening. So I think I'll pause there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, CFO Carson and Director and Dr. Duchner. I do have a speakers list going, but before we actually get to the questions this evening, I do want to call upon the delegation that we haven't yet heard from. So if we could please go to Ms. Kropp for a 2-minute delegation. And if I could just ask, I have taken note of who's had their hands up. If people could just put their hands down, please, so that if there are questions that folks have for the delegation, I appreciate that. Thank you. So over to Ms. Kropp. I'm sorry, Ms. Kropp, we can't hear you if you're speaking.
Sorry, can everyone hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay. Sorry, there's a delay on my audio, so I... All right, so everyone can hear me. I'm not sure if you have a video or not. Sometimes my screen shows up on Zoom meetings or not.
Yeah, we don't have video, but we do have good audio now. Thank you.
All right. So thank you. I hope it was explained that I hadn't received the link.
Sorry, Ms. Kropp, we're having difficulty hearing you again. So Carolyn, we can't hear you.
So thank you. I hope it was explained that I hadn't received the link.
Carolyn, I'm wondering if perhaps we could have you call in.
Ms. Kropp, I think you need to turn off the live stream. I think that's what the problem
Oh, okay. That's what the problem is. Sorry.
There we go. Okay.
Hang on just a second here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Please
sorry about that. I had the live stream still going.
You're not the first one to do it, so.
All right, so as I had said, I apologize. I hadn't received the link. I heard my name being called and realized that you were actually expecting me to be present. So thank you for fitting me in after the fact. I'm not sure if you all received the written questions that I had submitted. But I'll take 2 minutes quickly to go over them in case you haven't had a chance to see them. My background, I have 3 children currently with the OCDSB, 2 at high school level, 1 going into grade 6 at the elementary level. I'm also co-chair for Pleasant Park Public School Parent Council, and I also attend council meetings for Hillcrest High School. So my questions are as follows, and again, I want to give kudos to all the staff that are working on these recommendations and this return to school plan. I'm sure you've heard from lots of parents and you'll continue to. My view from tonight is more from a parent council point of view. So the first question is, over the years, we've been curtailed by what we can and cannot provide funding for with specifics to curriculum, et cetera. Are those limitations going to be updated by the board, since I haven't seen any ministry updates so far in light of COVID-19? What rules will be, what councils can purchase in light of the new reality? Given that as well, our funding sources have dried up as well, such as on-site pizza lunches, lunch lady lunches, etc. Second question, will the board help elementary schools who would like to create smaller class sizes, but are currently at capacity? Since we know that the ministry is not providing funding for smaller class sizes currently, how will the board do this? Will it be more portables? Will the OCDSB look at a made in Ottawa solutions unique to any other board? Number 3, outdoor classrooms, questions on that. Will there be a set fund to help establish these? It was part of the OCDSB return to school plan, but not much more information about it. How will inclement weather, snow, cold come into play? Are we looking at picnic tables, shelters? Who will be asked to pay for all of this? And if parent councils are asked to pitch in, because there is no set fund coming from the ministry or from the board, will there be set designs that we have to choose from, set vendors? Because these are all part of the constraints that parent councils normally have to work with. Question
Sorry
four.
to interrupt you, Ms. Crop, but your 2 minutes is up. It goes very quickly.
Yes.
So sorry to interrupt you. Certainly staff did receive your questions, and just so you know, for purposes of delegations, we don't usually have staff respond to delegations and questions that delegations may have, unless trustees have questions that they wish to ask of the delegation or that they wish to ask of staff based on the delegation's delegation, then that's generally how this goes. So I don't know if we have any questions. I'm sorry, if anybody has their hand up from previously, if you could please put your hands down. If you have a question for the delegate, leave your hand up. Ms. Capitani, I don't know if your hand is up for the delegation or if it's up from the previous session. I see Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I was wondering was whether it would be in order for me to ask whether staff could comment on the questions that Ms. Crop has presented us in writing, since that was received earlier in the day. And it may save us some repetition when we get into questions about the budget itself later on this evening.
Director?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will turn it to CFO Carson, as there are quite a number of very specific questions targeted to our budget approach. So CFO Carson, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to Ms. Crop for providing this to us ahead of time. I can tell you that we've been discussing the role of parent councils and some of the challenges with fundraising and council purchases. We know there's been lots of discussion back and forth on social media. At the moment, the province has not changed its guidelines with respect to fundraising, and so they continue to be quite clear that councils should not be raising funds for things that are to be provided by the board. I think we've talked before, there's some gray areas in terms of when we establish a board standard and a ratio, and we have councils that move beyond that with their own purchases. But we are at this time not looking to councils to be providing any additional support. One of the challenges we have with elementary schools or any of the schools that are looking for smaller class sizes is that the province, the funding for teaching staff has not changed. We do have information available about the number of classes, for example, that are capped at 20 at the primary level, and there will be school by school impacts as we get a better handle on the number of students where parents have chosen to stay at home. Where that occurs, I know that superintendents and principals are looking at their organization, and we will try to make sure we can put those classes in situations that are as safe as possible. But at this point, we are not in a position to make a commitment that we are automatically going to reduce those class sizes. Outdoor classrooms, we are looking at what would be required for to serve those areas more effectively. We do have dollars available to us in some of our supply budgets, in some of our facilities renewal budgets, where we would probably reallocate some of our other dollars that would normally be spent on our cyclical work in areas that are not building critical, but that we can't ignore for too many years. So the short answer is we would not be expecting councils to be acquiring that equipment. I think when we look at schools that are at or above capacity, we are looking at those schools now. We are looking at enrollments, and we are looking at, in most cases, if we had to provide portables, those portables would not be on site much before the end of September. So based on the enrollment numbers, we're expecting at the beginning of June, we have allocated portables as they should be allocated. If we find that we have additional challenges, we'll need to take a look at other uses inside the school. In terms of councils renting tents or domes, the answer is no. Those would be specifically things that the province would be saying are not appropriate for fundraising. It is the board's obligation to provide that accommodation to its standards. So I think that's number 4. When we get to 5, I can assure the Ms. Kropp and all of the council chairs, we will not be asking councils to provide PPE. What we have done is we have identified what is required based on advice from the various ministries, labor, health, and education, the ministry guidelines, the discussions we've had with Ottawa Public Health. We have the dollars to provide that PPE, and we are not going to be looking to councils to acquire more. And I would, in fact, suggest that we would probably be saying we should not be using council funds to move to a higher standard than that. And I say that because we know that in some areas there will simply be a shortage of product. So I think the simple answer to that one is a very strong no, we will not be going to councils. With respect to the French Language Board, I know that they have part of their challenge is the number of jurisdictions they cross over, the different size of their schools, and I can't speak to their success. At the moment, the ministry is really continuing to say that for the City of Ottawa and for the coterminous boards, they want us to continue with the hybrid model. The issue of ventilation is always one that we're concerned about. Our staff started to look at buildings early in the summer. We are looking at those areas where we needed to see changes in controls. We know that there are going to be some rooms that will require, that will be a real challenge for us. We're going to have to look at using more open windows. We're going to have to look at perhaps taking a room out of service and adding and moving to other areas. Those are areas that we are looking at. And you know, the questioner raised the point about what do we do on cold days with the windows open. I can tell you that when we've had the extremely warm days in summer, May and June, September in past years, there have always been ways to mitigate that to reduce the risk that we would have to send students home. Depending on what we see in the weather through the first few weeks of September, in some of our schools, I expect we may have to take a look at those temporary closures for a day where we are unable to resolve the heat problem. We'll monitor that as we do on a day-to-day basis. It's not a decision that's ever taken lightly because we have to balance the safety of students, the safety of staff, with the reality of the time it takes for parents to make alternative arrangements that day. The final question about Chromebooks and iPads, where we have loaned them out. The board has approved, the Board of Trustees approved additional expenditures during the month of, I think it was July, so that we could increase our fleet of Chromebooks. We also have continued to carry the same amount in the budget for 2021. And there will be enhanced funding, that $500,000 that was identified by the Ministry for Enhanced Support. I know Superintendent Lehman and is working with the individual schools to see how we are returning equipment to those schools, and that where technology was loaned out, that we can make sure that we can return as much of it as possible. I think we had identified that the additional purchases we made in the summer should be enough to replace a significant portion of Chromebooks that might not come back ready to operate in the first day. But I can't guarantee that there won't be any deficiency. But I know they are focused on getting those stocks, that's the wrong term, getting the fleet of Chromebook in the schools replenished as soon as possible, hopefully by September the 3rd. So those are quick answers. Some of them are probably raised elsewhere, and we'll be getting into them in more detail. But I think, Madam Chair, that's a quick run through of where we had got with these.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much, CFO Carson. I do have a few other non-voting members who wish to ask questions of delegates. I just want to mention that generally speaking, we don't allow, it is just trustees that can ask questions of delegations. I will allow a question this evening, however, from Ms. Handela, but it is generally not the case that during delegations that in fact non-voting members or representatives can ask questions of delegations. You can ask questions of staff, post presentations from staff, but I will allow it this time. So do go ahead, Ms. Handela.
I appreciate your indulgence, Chair. I don't think that's been the practice in my last 4 years as a community member, so I appreciate that I've been accorded the right to ask in the past, and I'm granted it this evening. I'd like to thank Ms. Kropp to speaking this evening, and thank you, CFO Carson, for taking the time, and Trustee Scott for allowing her questions to be fully addressed. I have a last question to springboard off the Chromebook for Ms. Kropp. I'm assuming your council or the council that you've been in charge of has supplemented Chromebooks in your school environments in the past?
Correct.
Given the information that you've been provided, do you believe that your council would be in a position to consider further supplementing this year? Or will what your council chooses to supplement perhaps go through a different level of review?
So we are a council coming from a privileged position because we have done very well in our fundraising in our area where we're located. We have a very active parent council. And because we couldn't spend anything for much of this past year, we come into this year with some money. And we're looking to our principal and admin team and staff to tell us what they need. But yeah, as you can see from my question, it was to know that because councils have very much purchased iPads and Chromebooks over the years, it's to sort of know that, and we've purchased it for our individual school, obviously, to supplement our students. And so we just wondering what the assurance is that those would come back to the individual school. Although I understand that they had to go out during this past year to supplement everyone across the board, and that's perfectly fine. But again, the money was spent for our individual school, and to know that it would come back again to help our specific students who are registered for this year.
Thank you very much. We'll raise it in the course of questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for your delegation this evening, Ms. Kropp. Seeing no further questions, we will return back to our agenda where there were questions of staff and the staff recommended budget. The first, so the order I currently have is Trustee Fisher, Trustee Campbell, then Trustee Bill. And then I do have a series of our non-voting representatives who also have raised their hands previously. So as per our bylaws or our common practices, we'll go with trustee questions first, and then I will turn to our non-voting representatives. So first over to you, Trustee Fisher.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And, you know, I want to thank staff for bringing forward the budget and for continuing the conversation. We all know it's a difficult year, and we've discussed a number of times how this is very much going to be a modular year in terms of, you know, needing to pass a budget, but needing to adjust as we go and as we learn more. You know, not only in terms of the direct expenses that we're incurring from the pandemic, but what the province ultimately is going to supplement and provide, hopefully in future grants. So thanks for all the work that you're doing. And I know that there's still unanswered questions. I guess the two questions that I have, you know, in tonight's presentation, the CFO mentioned, you know, roughly 11 million in additional funding that is expected from the province. And if I also remember correctly, I think the draft budget allocated an additional 4 million for COVID-related expenses. So is that, am I to read that correctly, and that the 4 million would be on top of the 11 million that we're anticipating from the province? That's my first question.
That's correct, Madam Chair. We're still working on it, but at this point, it would not be our intention to reduce that provision of $4 million significantly. We might, but at this point, it would not be our intention to see this replacing dollars that we were recommending the board commit on its own.
Okay, so just to be absolutely clear, we're going to keep that 4 million line item for potential COVID-related expenses in addition to whatever's flowing in from the province.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, thanks, CFO. The other question I have relates to folio 13 of 94 and the conversation that staff have been having with the ministry about the redirection of school condition index and school renewal grant funding. I'm a bit perplexed that the ministry has been so dogmatic about not allowing the board to redirect those funds, particularly since they're going to be used for plexiglass partitions to enhance school safety, modifications to HVAC systems to improve fresh air circulation, more frequent HVAC maintenance activities, including filter replacement, temporary alterations to learning spaces. These are all, you know, structural and capital related expenses. Can staff explain a little bit why there's reluctance from the ministry to even contemplate the flexibility of redirecting those SCI and school renewal funds for those kind of purposes? It seems like that's the right reason, if there is ever a reason, to be able to do that. So why are they not? Why are they hesitant?
Madam Chair, there's 2 or 3 parts to that. The first is we do have, with facilities renewal money, some flexibility to apply a portion of those dollars to items that would be considered routine maintenance rather than capital improvements. And so we always try to make sure that we have had to, in past years, maximize that number in order to make sure we could balance the budget. The SCI in particular, though, was designed to really support capital expenditures, those that are extending the life of an asset or that are a significant major improvement in it. So when we talk about things like plexiglass, some of our temporary barriers, improved maintenance, those are all operating costs. Part of it has to do with the ministry, not just the ministry, but the government itself, and the way they allocate funds to the various ministries based on their individual votes, what's capital, what's operating. And so there is that potential issue We've continued to have the discussion with them. Much of the work that we will be doing, it would be difficult to justify capitalizing it, because some of it would be short-term in nature, and that's my real challenge. If we had a better argument for it to be permanent, then it would be eligible for that funding. If we, again, time is an issue, but if we identify that it will be to our advantage to make significant changes to an air handling system in the next 6 months or next summer to provide us with support for the following year, assuming we're still in COVID, well, then that's a justifiable charge. But we are essentially, what we're asking them is to give us more flexibility in using capital dollars to cover what is essentially an operating expense. And the ministry has traditionally been cautious about that, because just like the ministry, just like the government itself does it, school boards, municipal governments are often too willing to take money out of what is essentially a capital and a long-term funding to meet current needs. And so we are also trying to identify for them that that is not our intention. And we're also trying to recognize that, like most boards, and us in particular, we've been very successful in getting school condition index funding, not just because of the condition of our buildings, but because of the level of detail that Mr. Bradley and his staff and others have been submitting. So we're in this situation where we've got more money than we were actually able to deploy. The discussions continue, but I think the 3 key points are the source of the fundings are different within the different votes from the House, and that is something that they would need to reconcile. The second is the ever-present concern that school boards could be too quick to dig into capital dollars for operating expenses rather than to take a look at potential savings in operations. I think that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and in part that frustrates me. Not your response, but I think just the dealing of it from the ministry. We all know about votes. We all know about how these things are accounted for in terms of operations and long-term capital and how things are amortized. At the end of the day, we're working through a pandemic, and there are things that have to be done to our facilities to make sure that our staff and our students can go to school confidently in a safe learning space. And you know, I don't think that this is an unjustified request. So I certainly hope that staff will continue that conversation forcefully. I also hope that the director, because I can't imagine we're the only board in this situation, that the director will consider raising this at code to make sure that there's a stronger voice with the ministry to say, listen, like this is a short-term need and it's a very real need. So let's stop with the bureaucracy and the accounting tricks and let's figure out how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Fisher. Next on my list, I have Trustee Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and my thanks also to staff. I like what staff are having to deal with here in terms of putting out a wildfire with carpets or something, and while new fires are breaking out around them, and constant new questions are being raised, and I'm sure that will continue for some time. I know they're doing their utmost to address it all. I appreciate the fact that some of the questions are still to be answered, and we may have the answers for Thursday. I look forward to those. With respect to some of the answers that we've had thus far for this evening, with respect to at least some of my questions, they don't quite hit the mark. And so before I end this evening, I'll be sending my, I guess, clear request perhaps to staff with respect to some of them. I have a couple of major questions, though, from my mind that are pretty key in terms of how I look at the budget. And the first is related to possible risks to our budget. And I know I've raised this before. And I want to go on to a comment which I thought the CFO made in his oral intro, to the effect that, this is paraphrasing perhaps a little bit, that staff don't want to budget overly conservatively where additional ministry monies may be expected down the road. So when I look at the budget, I see a lot of potential risks. A lot of potential revenue shortfalls, which we haven't made risk provision for in the budget, and potential additional expenses, which again, we haven't necessarily made, in my view, perhaps a full risk provision for. So my concern is that we may have an over and above our deficit planning, an important in-year additional deficit. So do I take it that should I take it that the CFO's comment in their oral is meant to address that concern?
Madam Chair, partially. The trustee raises the point, and it's a good one. That's why we have that overall $4 million provision. There are uncertainties that we're not sure of that could happen, and we'll need to be able to address them as they come along. We do believe that there are some areas where the ministry has indicated they would not adjust the GSN at this time, but they would continue to monitor the situation as it evolved. And we expect that based on what we're hearing from other school boards, that we will all encounter some of those same pressures. So for example, about 5 or 6 years ago, the province changed funding so that students that stayed for a 5th year were funded at the normal rate only up to a level of 34 credits, I think it was. That kids that stick around for more than that are then funded at the Con Ed rate. What we have all said that we would expect this year, we will see more students in that excess credit situation. When I say we, all school boards are expecting to see that. The ministry said they would not make an adjustment at this time, but they will monitor it. I think that's one we'll see an in-year adjustment on. I do think that we will see some in-year changes based on what happens with secondary schools in the largest school boards, whether we're going to continue in the hybrid model for the balance of the year or whether it converts at some point. So there are those flexes, there are risks. It's like any other year. We have, in some cases, put together belts and suspenders. We have our normal allocation in B&LT for Chromebooks. We have additional dollars coming to us from the province for additional technology. Depending on what the nature of the unexpected is, we might say we might not use both of those allocations. Obviously, you'd use the PPF money first. So we are looking at this as a flexible tool to get us going. I think that the reality is the ministry will be watching all school boards carefully, but the reality, I believe, is that they recognized that providing that we would be challenged to put in place some of the enhancements, even with the dollars they announced at the beginning of August, simply from the point of view of hiring and staffing and allocating. So I wish I could give you more perspective, but I'm as confident as I can be that we have offsetting opportunities for savings if we had to do it. They wouldn't be pleasant, but if we had to, we would have that flexibility during the year to defer some expenditures. I always use one example. We have a provision to replace, I think it's 5 or 6 of our vehicles annually for our tradespeople. We, at one point, when times were really tough, we didn't replace anything for about 4 years. We just deferred. We've been able to get back on track, but this is one of those years where we would postpone those expenditures as late in the year as we could, so that if in fact we needed to offset over expenditure somewhere else, that would be a source of savings. The other area that we're looking at is that many of our provisions that we've set up for expenses are being handled at the central level, but it also means that in a lot of cases, we will see lower than normal school expenses out of their school budgets. And so we are going to be discussing with principals over the course of the next 3 or 4 months how we can participate in cost sharing some of these items where we have wanted to make sure we captured a board-wide provision, but it may mean that the initial school budget will see some reductions. For example, as we've gotten better at our remote learning, our use of electronic tools, we should see a reduction in some of our school-based copying costs. Those are some of the areas that we would be looking to for offsets as we continue our planning, as we get people back in the buildings, and as we start to see some of the real experience in September and October.
Thank you. I'll take that as confirmation of my initial question and very much appreciate the additional, very helpful information. Madam Chair, if I could go back on the list, but hopefully I have time for one more question in this round.
You have 45 seconds. I will put you back on the list though if you.
Sounds good. I'll try and fit it in the 45 then. It's again a key question for me. I understand that a budget is predicated upon certain assumptions, and in terms of what we expect during the year and how we expect things to operate. We always say in our board, safety is first, right? Safety is king. Safety comes first before all else. So presumably, we're predicating our budget on the assumption that what our provisions are meet a minimum safety standard of some kind. We're not public health experts. The board staff are not public health experts. I'm not a public health expert. And I guess my question then is, are our safety minima, and I'm thinking specifically of the meters distancing provisions in our return to school plan, are they endorsed, not approved? I get they don't have the authority to approve, but are they endorsed as sufficient as part of the package of mitigations that have been put forward by our local Ottawa Public Health or not, or are we simply winging this on our own?
Thanks, Trustee Campbell. Over to you, staff. Director or CFO.
Madam Chair, I can begin, and the director, I'm sure will, and the associate director will also want to chime in. We have been working with Ottawa Public Health from the very going back to March on these issues. We meet with them. We have a regular weekly meeting, and then there's probably another 3 or 4 every week. As we were developing the details of the return to school plan, they were being consulted probably on a daily basis. And I think it's fair to say that this program has been developed in collaboration with them. I am sure, like any plans, there are areas that they would prefer to see go one way rather than the other. They are, however, have been quite cooperative in assisting us and pointing out where we have differences. With respect to distancing, I think that has been an issue because the provincial plan assumes that 2-meter distancing will not be possible in all cases, and it's why alternate layers are put in place. The enhanced PPE for staff, the use of a mask and a shield, the requirement for students in 4 to 12 to wear masks. We are looking at additional physical barriers on students' desks. Those are, when you start to put those layers together, I believe that was the ministry's intention when they recognized that within a classroom, there may be cases where you can't support the entire 2 meters. But I think I'll ask the director or Associate Director Reynolds to add to that.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll add another piece to it that it doesn't speak to categorical terms, I suppose, from the safety point of view, but we are talking about not just physical safety, but balancing physical safety with emotional well-being. And that has been raised by a number of partners in this conversation. And so how it is that we balance out the two, because we recognize that keeping students, young students who have been at home for a significant period of time, there has been a flag raised about the impact on their well-being. And so the question around bringing students back, looking at the data around transmission, where transmission patterns are higher, and then layering that, and I use CFO Carson's words, as well as the minister's words around layering that along with the provisions that we're putting into place. We also have looked at the data around how large our classes are. And so we do recognize that although we have some classes that are naturally at 15, we have some classes that are not significantly over. And so recognizing that there's a natural capacity for maximizing spacing with some of our classrooms. So it's difficult to make a sweeping edict, if you will, that quote unquote guarantees safety, because again, there are multiple factors that come into play. But I think that what I can say is confidently is we're maximizing every possibility around maximizing space between students, putting up barriers between students, creating cohorts and bubbles that essentially reduce contacts between students, with the view to using a variety of different strategies together to bring kids back to school, to mitigate the issue of mental health and socio-emotional safety. So I know that Associate Director has been the active conduit between our district and public health. I believe that I've kind of communicated what has been coming through public health through him and the team that has been sharing with us, as well as through other systems, our Catholic partners, as well as the directors in other districts. I don't know if AD Reynolds, if there's anything CFO Carson and I have left out that you feel is worthy of the cause.
Thanks. Not to take too much time, through you, Madam Chair, I'll just comment a little bit more specifically on the 1 meter. Ottawa Public Health has assured us that there is evidence that transmission is lower when the distance of 1 meter or greater when possible is managed. So 1 meter is hitting that threshold. As per the Sick Kids report, it is recognized that a 1 meter separation also provides a certain degree of protection and may approach the benefits of 2 meters in a school setting where there are other measures put in place. And the 1 meter is also in line with the World Health Organization, as well as in accordance with the provincial guidelines we have so far. So to the trustee's question, we did not just come up with the 1 meter all on our own.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Some of it addressed my question, some of it did not. I'll need to follow up and I'll go to the next round. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Trustee Campbell. I've put you on for second time speaker. Next up, I have Trustee Bill.
Okay, I'm also going to extend my gratitude to everybody that's on this call, all of the staff, all of the parents, and all of the advocates that have been working really hard behind the scenes to ensure the safety of students and staff. And I hear you, Director, that it's not about allocating funds, it's about the conditions. And I understand from your comments that equity is a driver, so I will try to be concise in my questions. So I really want to understand what is the risk analysis associated with the funds that we have dedicated to our COVID response. So what I'm asking is to see what it is that we plan to spend to respond to COVID, what the province has allocated, and how there is risk mitigated from all of those. So what I am talking about, what is the assessment? Do we have enough custodial staff? What is the assessment pre versus post-COVID for mental health support
And do we have the right number of mental health supports in place to address the post-COVID reality? What about the HVAC upgrades and the ventilation systems? If we spend this much money versus this much money, how does our safety change? And then when it comes for really important, I want to reiterate again, communications. We have to ensure that parents, teachers know that we have taken into account what are the factors involved with all of these expenditures, and we understand the risks associated with spending just this much on mental health versus this much on mental health. And I know we don't have all the answers, but I'd like if somebody could speak to that. And then I also just want to reiterate that my understanding is the deficit that we are putting forth primarily results from pre-COVID budget expenditures, not post-COVID budget expenditures. That's the first bundle of questions. The next one is, I appreciate that we say we will prioritize services and supports for traditionally marginalized populations, but I cannot see how we're doing that, which leads to the next question. Can we cap the number on classes, the number of students? And if we can't do that across the board, can we do that for traditionally marginalized populations, the ones that have already been identified through RAISE, to ensure that those that will probably be more affected by COVID reality, that they have a lesser chance of transmitting that? And then, yeah, I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. I think there's a number of questions there for staff. CFO, if you'd like to start, or director, if you'd like to start.
Well, I'll give it a start and then pass it to the CFO. And so when we look at what I hear you saying, Trustee Bill, is that you're looking for essentially an itemized column by column. We do this, put this much money in, and then we will get this amount of improvement. I can't say that we can do that. I can't. We're kind of looking at some suppositions here, and that's why we highlighted the mental health piece at the very beginning. One of the things we need to recognize is that we're not starting at zero. And so we have already made investments into mental health, and we have shifted much of our practice around mental health and the support to students in the area of mental health over the past couple of years, as we have learned. And we have also received different kinds of funding. So essentially, we're not in a situation where we have been doing nothing about mental health and now need to add funds to it. What we are doing is we're looking at how it is we augment what we are already doing, with the recognition that some of it is a shift in practice as opposed to a shift in money. But again, resources are always welcome. So that's where it becomes difficult to create an algorithm, if you will, of how much, if we put this much money in, we'll get this much outcome, because that, in my experience, that is not usually the case. I think the CFO has identified that what we're looking at is how it is that we can make a reasonable projection of where we can infuse funds to create change, and measure and recalibrate if that is needed. So as we get into January, for example, this situation could look very differently from the way it looks now. It could be a situation where we are poised for a full return of everyone, or we could be in a scenario where we are at the other end of that spectrum, that looks more similar to last March. And so what the financial needs will need to be directed will be different in those circumstances. And I think that this is where the CFO has made reference to the fact that we need to conservatively add to the budget, but we need to create a scenario where we are able to change direction. And if it is that further funds need to be added. So you had quite a long list of items. I clicked on the mental health item. You did speak about ventilation and classroom and capping classroom numbers. The capping of classroom numbers or class sizes is not one that we can undertake as a district unilaterally. There are some significant implications to doing that. That said, I think that prioritizing ensuring that students in more historically marginalized communities are essentially getting the benefit of more hours in school, more hours, more opportunities for any of the additional supports that are provided, ensuring that these are students who we prioritize when we're talking about resources for remote learning or synchronous learning who may not have selected to return to school. Those kinds of things are where it is we can put our attention first. And we've also considered how that looks with our English language for our English language learners as well, how it is that we are prioritizing those needs along with the needs of students who have special education needs, how we are prioritizing those students, not only at the elementary level, but also at the secondary level. So moving to the question of how we prioritize the needs of students who have experienced disadvantage is one thing. We're not necessarily only simply saying that by capping the class sizes, we're serving those particular needs. Capping the class sizes is at this point outside of the purview of the district to simply do unilaterally. But I can turn it to CFO Carson now, who may have further on some of the other questions that you raised, Trustee Bell.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Trustee Bill. I think some of those you may have given me before, but I will try to capture a couple of them. With the mechanical upgrades to buildings to improve ventilation, our challenge there is time. And in order to come up with an effective upgrade to a ventilation system means that you need to have time to design it, to tender it, to implement it. And our experience has shown in many of those buildings that in addition to, say, we'll pick a number, $800,000 to $1 million for just the mechanical component of it, that while we're at it, we usually end up spending anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 to $600,000 on asbestos abatement. And you get into one of those circumstances where you move the kids out for a year, you move everybody to portables for a year. And if you do that while they're out, you might as well do that electrical work since you got the ceiling open. So those are not simple changes to make. And that's why they are not a key part of this year's plan. The other issue of the risk analysis, and I don't think I know my departments, we don't have a specific area that we've written it down, but the issue came up, for example, I think it was Trustee Campbell. I apologize if it wasn't. Do we have enough custodial time? The reality is that we have begun to look, now that we've got a better idea of the modeling from the province. Once we see the enrollment, we can start to finalize the number of classrooms. We can, in fact, take a look at the workloading and, in a general sense, identify what are the additional tasks required during the daytime. The evening time isn't bad. People are working hard, but it's how we manage during the daytime, the additional requirement to do touch points, washrooms twice during the school day. Those are the areas that are taking the time. If we end up with, for discussion purposes, 50 custodial full-time equivalents out of the current allocation, if we take the 16 that were provided through the PPFs, not the PPFs, the job protection funds that came through the collective agreements, it's 66 full-time equivalents. That by itself gives us more than half a person for every elementary school in the board. It may not when you first look at it, sound like a lot, but it does provide 4 hours of work. You put that with some of the chief's unassigned time, you're getting pretty close to being able to manage that, if not reaching it, without having to take a look at what other changes we might need to make with reallocating some of the staff currently working evenings. Mr. Clough is here this evening, and he knows that I'm not negotiating in public. There's a lot of issues we have to work out. The availability of staff, the classification of staff, permanent, full-time, part-time. We need to recognize how we respect the collective agreement and work within it. We believe we would not have put forward the plan if we didn't believe we could meet the requirements of the province and Ottawa Public Health. From a safety point of view, my staff, myself, we take our obligations not just to the ministry and to the province seriously. Our first obligation is to the kids in the district. So I can tell you that while we wish we could be doing more, we wish it could all be done with supplementary funding and not mean the redirection of some of our internal. We have taken a look at how we would manage those unusual circumstances as they come up. The final piece that I would say is that, Madam Chair, we have recognized in all of our planning that there will need to be school by school flexibility. As the director said, we're going to have some schools where, because the class sizes break the way they do, that distancing for most of the classes will not be an issue. We're going to have some schools where we won't have that, and that's where we're going to have to devote additional resources. I can, again, our commitment to equity and supporting those students that are most at risk, I think we show it not so much as a line item in the budget, but in every decision we make during the day. Having said all of that, Trustee Bell, we'll take a look at what your request and see what we could put together for Thursday for you. We can't guarantee it will be everything, but maybe we can capture some of what we've been doing orally and in meetings. We might be able to capture on paper to give you an example, that, if nothing else, a couple of examples of how we're working through that process.
Very much, CFO. I just, Trustee Bell, you have like 20 seconds left on the clock.
So I'm really looking forward to hearing the non-voting members. What I want to say thank you is, why within the memo does it say that we've already sought out approval from the ministry for the deficit if we haven't actually approved the deficit?
CFO?
Chair, we are required to obtain the ministry approval when we go beyond the 1% level. When we did this the last time, what was most effective was to identify to the province the amount of money that we were looking for, so that they could be ready to have that ministry approval, so that we didn't get caught having the board approve a budget that had no chance of getting that ministry approval. This will be signed off by the minister, but it will be based on recommendations from staff. That's why those discussions are ongoing. And we haven't submitted a formal approval that says we want X amount of dollars, but we're working in that range. Sorry if the language isn't clear, but we are working with them so that if the board were to approve this next week, according to the original schedule, that we could receive that ministry approval quickly, and that will make sure that the flow of funding isn't delayed and requiring October reconciliations. Hope that helps.
Okay, is that it, Trustee Bell, or would you want to be put back on the?
It's never it, but I'd rather hear from the other people that want to speak.
So I have Trustee Boothby next. I do just want to note we have a very, very long list of people who wish to ask questions this evening. I will go through the trustees first, and then I will go to the non-voting. And I'm just going to go through the list so that you can start taking your names off in your hands, because it's starting to get a little hard to kind of manage who's up. So I have from previous to the delegation, I have Jennifer Capitani, Kelly Branham, Dr. Yes?
I'm just selecting trustees over non-voting members.
It's in our bylaws, Trustee Ellis. It's in our policies that it is that way. I did check on this previous to going this way. I did ask Manager Guthrie about how that works, and she did tell me that trustees go first.
I'd like to challenge the chair on this, even if it's in our policy. We can change our policy for a meeting. I want to hear from our non-voting members as much as I want to hear from my fellow colleagues. In fact, more so, because there's a mechanism for us as trustees and staff to communicate with one another, not so much with the non-voting members. This is maybe in the policy, but this is not adhered to on a regular basis.
Okay, I appreciate that, Trustee Ellis, and I'm getting a note from Manager Guthrie that in fact that information was incorrect that she originally shared with me. So my apologies to the non-voting members. It is, I was trying to get clarity on that, so apologies to everyone this evening. So I'll go, because I actually did have Trustee Fisher, Trustee Campbell, and Trustee Bell initially on the list. And then I had Jennifer Capitani, Kelly Granham, David Wildman, and Jean Trant on the list prior to the delegation. And then I'll go back to the list as it's in, and I will try to follow along to the list that I see in front of me after. So I'll go now to Jennifer Capitani.
Actually, my question was already answered, so knock one off your list.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. Then on to Kelly Granham.
There we go. Perfect. So my question came to mind when CFO Carson was on page 18 of the slides he was showing us. And because I am represent secondary occasional teachers, I'm looking for funding for OTs. And so I'll tell you where my mind is that we know that occasional teachers are always funded, of course. But we do know that that's not ever a lot of money. We often at the end of the year, some schools run out of money for that and they struggle. So what I was hoping to hear is that there was some capacity within the budget that you were going to be thinking about some extra money for occasional teachers. So there's a couple things that I'm thinking about, and I would think that that it would be a reasonable assumption that people are going to be off sick more this year, especially when we're saying that people that have some of these symptoms, even before diagnosed with COVID, they can't come into work. So we're definitely going to have an increased number of vocational teachers. So that being said, I'm looking for some money. But again, along with that, I'm wondering how we are going to manage vocational teachers. It is my knowledge so far as of this afternoon that there's not going to be any huge change for how we deal with vocational teachers in this board. Other than masks and hand sanitizers and washing our hands and our 2-meter distance and all that type of stuff. But there's going to be nothing done as far as limiting their access to working in multiple school boards. It was also said that they will be working in multiple schools. And even within one school, they're going to be working in multiple cohorts. So, so all of that really scares me. And so I'm listening to the budget to try and see where the money is that we are dealing in. And all I can think of is, because we're not making any significant changes for vocational teachers, that we haven't put any extra money around vocational teachers. I would love to see us look at something like the elementary dot for secondaries, where, and I'm not usually somebody that advocates for that, but this is a different situation. We need to keep people in cohorts. We can't have people all over the place. Especially, I mean, some of my, because of the of where we live in Ottawa, I've got members that are working for Upper Canada, for the Catholic Board, for ETFO, and so in 2 different panels within our own school board. People can be all over the place within a week. So I'm really concerned that we are thinking about that. Or not that we're not thinking about it, please forgive me, that I'm not seeing any significant plans to restrict that movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Granum. I don't know if staff wish to comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so I do have Superintendent McCoy present, and I'm going to ask her to make some commentary on those items because they indeed are items that have been under discussion. While it is that we're not in a position to offer an answer to every single one of those points, certainly those points have been and continue to be worthy of our consideration through this process. So I'm going to call on Superintendent McCoy. I'm not seeing her on the screen, but I saw her icon.
I'm here, Madam Director.
Thank you.
Thank you. So through you, Madam Chair, and as Ms. Granum said, we did in fact have a meeting this afternoon, HR and LR staff, with the presidents of 3 of our bargaining units who represent our casual and occasional staff in schools. There are other bargaining units, but we had indicated that we were meeting with this group first, since they are the groups that provide direct support to students in classrooms. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss some of the strategies and that we have been thinking about around our casual and occasional staff, recognizing that they form an important part of our return to school plan, and that there are still some questions outstanding, as Ms. Granum indicated. We did present this afternoon the notion that we are looking at a variety of what I'll describe as risk mitigation strategies, that we have had some consultations with Ottawa Public Health around not only the casual and occasional staff, but also our itinerant staff, and who often work in multiple sites, and are being guided by the advice that we have received from Ottawa Public Health in terms of taking into consideration all of the layered precautions that are in place in each of our schools, and certainly from their perspective, ensuring that we are able to maintain a record of who is in our schools and who is in particular classes. In terms of casual and occasional staff specifically, one of the concerns that we heard this afternoon, and which we're trying to be mindful of as we look at the possibility of putting limits on where our occasional staff can work, is also their access to work. We know that many of them rely on having access to multiple sites in some cases in order to ensure that they are getting enough work, and we heard that concern raised this afternoon during our meeting from the unions. So at this point, we haven't made any final decisions around some of those key questions. This afternoon was really an opportunity to further discuss some of those points, but with a view to ensuring that we are communicating back to the unions and certainly to our casual and occasional staff as quickly as possible, because we know that that they have some of those concerns as well. We agree that this year we can anticipate that there will be an increased level of absenteeism, and so all the more reason why we want to ensure that that we have a robust casual and occasional pool available. We have not closed the door on any options, including, for example, a dot-like program at secondary, and identified that as something we're considering this afternoon. So we're in the process in HR based on feedback from the unions, based on what we're hearing from principals, and looking at what other boards are doing, and we'll be putting a plan in place and answering these questions.
Thank you very much. And sorry, Ms. Granum, that was it for your 3 minutes. Okay, great. So moving on then, we have David Wildman up next.
Thank you, Chair. The elementary occasional teachers are very concerned that when they're accepting daily assignments this year, they'll be putting themselves at risk of contacting the virus. And then, of course, that moves into the risk of taking it home to their families. But it also increases the possibility of them getting sick from work and having to self-isolate with no financial supports for that period of time. So there's a tremendous amount of anxiety amongst the elementary occasional teachers to see a plan and to figure out if they're going to feel safe. Keep in mind that many of the occasional teachers work outside of education to supplement their income. And they are telling me that they feel a lot more confidence in being safe from the virus with the COVID-19 protocols that have been put in place in their other places of work. So that brings us to initially when the rumors of the return to school started, we were talking about the hybrid model, and we were talking about small cohorts and 6 feet of social distancing. And as soon as we moved to larger cohorts and we moved to 3 feet rather than 6, telling them that that's safe makes them think it's not as safe as what was in place before. So that gives them doubt, and I think the perception of safety is something that's almost as important as the real safety features. So I just wanted you to be aware of those things. I have a question, and if this is out of order, let me know, because it's not directly a question about the current budget discussion. I just wondered if CFO Carson knew the answer to this is what % of the province's education budget to deal with the pandemic, what is the percentage of the total pandemic budget? So is the government really shortchanging and undervaluing education in their response?
Thank you for that question. I'm not sure if staff can actually answer that question, given that that is more a case of a question for the province. So I'm not sure, Mr. Wildman, as you did point to that, whether that question is actually in order for staff, but CFO, I'll let you entertain the question.
I'm certainly not going to discuss whether or not it's adequate. They announced, including school board additional expenditures plus the investment in public health, about $309 million. This year's budget for K-12 education in the province, including capital, is somewhere around 14 to 15 billion. So that's the percentage. And in terms of what it is the overall COVID response, I don't think, I haven't seen those numbers, so I can't comment on that.
Okay, thank you for that. I have, most of my questions have been answered already, but I have a few more. Can you remind me, I'll just send those along and have them answered in writing. Can you remind me, please, where to send my questions?
If you send them to me and Dave, sorry, Madam Chair, we did circulate a memo, but if you send it, make sure that it's copied to Kevin Gardner and myself, and we'll make sure it gets to the right spot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wildman. Next, I have Jean Trant. I'm not sure if Jean is. Jean, are you?
Yep. Yeah, I was just trying to be visible. My question has to do with, I hear a lot of talk about enhanced money for cleaning, but in my mind, that is talking more about the custodial care, the general class, the general school cleaning. My EAs have to, and for some, and ECs as well, they have to do a lot of cleaning. They are hands-on day in, day out with students who are constantly putting stuff in their mouth, constantly dealing with stuff. They're doing toileting. Has anything been put to mind for that type of cleaning that has to go on continually all day long, not just in between classes or at the end of the day or beginning of the day? Has that any thought been given to that type of cleaning?
Madam Chair, I can begin, and Superintendent Simmons may have more details. We have looked at the unique requirements first of the 2 CV sites and our other schools where we have programs with students with significant physical needs, and we're working with Superintendent Simmons and his staff to see how we can coordinate that response. We have already planned for and included expenditures for enhanced PPE for school-based staff and for more frequent changes than we would see for others. And I think Superintendent Simmons can talk a little bit about some of the issues around enhanced training and the work that he and his folks are doing.
Thank you, CFO and Madam Chair, through you. We are engaging in ongoing conversations around what that looks like. Part of the normal cleaning process would involve the EAs cleaning a surface afterwards. We do have a working group, for lack of a better word, with our Crystal Bay and Clifford Bowie principals, where we're trying to work through some of those unique issues, and they would extend in some cases to our physical support programs and perhaps some other programs as well. So it is a topic of conversation that we're engaged in, trying to ensure that these services get the attention that they need to in order to be used by several students in turn.
Forgive me, but EAs are not expected to do a lot of cleaning. Yes, they do at the end of the day, surface cleaning here and there, but they don't do it all day long, which is going to be needed now because we are not talking a normal day. We are talking stuff that needs to be cleaned more regularly, more frequently. How is that going to be done? Are they going to be trained on it? Is this going to be an expectation that EAs are now doing all of the cleaning that normally would have done by a custodian? I'm talking about the body break room, the toilets that are going to have to be used very frequently for the spec ed kids and the kinder kids for that matter. If the custodians are busy doing other things, touch points and everything else in the school, I surely hope that this stuff is not going to be put down onto my members just because they are the ones that are hands-on with these students.
Madam Chair, if I may, when a student has finished with the assistance in toileting, there is a cleanup protocol that currently happens prior to all of this. We'll be looking at supporting the training with our EAs in those situations to ensure that they have the understanding that they need. But we will also be looking in other situations around the custodial staff and the kinds of work that we're doing. CFO Carson has talked about the demands placed on their time during the day and shifting responsibilities as necessary. However, I do know that in many situations, educational assistants do support in those situations. I'm thinking primarily around toileting, when finished, wiping down a surface so that they are able to support additional students.
That's not my understanding. My understanding is EAs are responsible for the physical child, not the physical space. So anything that's on the child or to do with the child, yes, they 100% are dealing with that. They are not dealing with the physical space. That is what the custodian is there for. There won't be enough custodians around to do that kind of stuff. Are you telling me now that you're saying that EAs have always cleaned toilets? I know they haven't. I know they haven't cleaned bathrooms. I know they haven't done that kind of stuff. So you're not answering my question.
Respectfully, Madam Chair, I'm not talking about cleaning toilets. I'm talking about the surface cleaning that would happen, for example, on a table after a student has finished it and those kinds of things. In some cases, custodians do assist with that, but in other situations, educational assistants also do that as part of the cleanup upon finishing a routine with a student.
So you haven't answered my question about the body break rooms and those types of rooms that should be cleaned in between student use. And we can't restrict the use of those rooms because some of those students, that's the only way they're going to get through the day is if they have those body break rooms. What's happening with that?
So separately with respect to body break rooms, resource rooms, and so on, we are looking at processes to keep those rooms in use to support students. We are looking at things like individual sensory equipment that could be binned for a student to minimize the amount of cleaning that has to occur. We may be in a situation also where we have to limit the use of some of the equipment in accordance with cleaning protocols and what we're able to provide. So I would expect that the nature of the activities that are available to students in our resource rooms may have to shift a little bit to recognize the limitations we have with respect to cleaning. But again, we will also be looking at individual circumstances and figuring out what we can do to try to support the ongoing use of those rooms.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Trent. Next up, I have Susan Gardner.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the trustees for the meeting this evening. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Janice McCoy, Nadia Twaj, Petra Dushner, and all the people that have worked on the table teams with us. I do, though, however, have to say that we can only color in the lines for so long. The Ontario government is risking the health and safety and the lives and wellness of our students, their families, and the workers in our elementary schools. As employers under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, school boards are required to take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of workers. As has been mentioned by other speakers, in every other indoor space in the province, people are required to wear masks, anyone over the age of 2. And also, the advisement has continually been to have 2-meter distancing. The board also has a duty under the Human Rights Code to accommodate for both medical conditions and family status issues. I can tell you that employee wellness has been working very hard. Each of the union presidents and every other released officer within their buildings have been working very hard to talk to members about the fact that they are not feeling safe. Their doctors are not feeling that it is a safe place for them to return. I cannot tell you how many medicals we have coming in, how many emails we have coming in. It's not just the anxiety. We have people who are immunocompromised. We have people who live with family members who are immunocompromised. We are not doing everything we can to say that you take every reasonable precaution, well, you know, and it says here that you have to do it wherever possible. So we keep hearing these weaselly words like may and if it's possible. What makes it possible? Funding makes it possible. Clearly, we do not have enough funding in the budget here. I would like to ask a couple of questions in terms of all of the people who will be away. I can tell you, I know Kelly has already mentioned the fact that yes, there will be a lot of requests for occasional teachers. Where is that funding? I mean, my own doctor said that 50 people had come in this week to ask to have an accommodation. It is not a safe workplace right now. We do not believe it is. Kindergarten classrooms with 30 children without masks and 2 adults in the room, that is not a safe place. This is not the fault of the school board, but we would like to ask you, what are you going to do in order to ensure that our staff and the children that they love to teach are going back to a safe environment?
Thank you very much, Ms. Gardner. Is that it for your questions?
If I do have more time.
Yeah, you don't. That's why I just paused,
Okay.
And so I'm just asking. You've got a few more seconds, but shall we turn to staff first to answer?
Sure. Thank you.
So, Director, would you like to field this question first?
I'll start the question and I'll ask Superintendent McCoy to come in behind if that's okay. So we do recognize that there are, and we said this at the beginning, there continue to be many, many questions. And we certainly, while it is that we're drawing on the research that is presented to us, not only from our own public health, but also from other healthcare institutions or health institutions, as well as other jurisdictions where return has happened. And we're really trying our best to understand what the structures that have been put into place and how the impact has occurred. We also are obligated to work within the parameters of the guidelines that we have been given. And so there are some expectations that have been outlined. And those expectations that have been outlined are provincial, although it is that there are some regional adjustments, more for the high school, of course, based on the data from the medical officers of health. So while we do understand that there are a lot of concerns about the interpretation of these pieces, one of the things that we're trying to do to the question, to Sue's question, is to interpret to maximize our interpretation of our actions that we can take within the guidelines that we have been given. So that would include the way for the provision of PPE for our educators, not just our teachers, our educators who are involved with all of our students, maximizing spacing. So I've referenced a lot of those pieces already, with also understanding the fact that there are different sets of different research perspectives on how it is that young students differ from older students in terms of this virus, the transmission, and so forth. We do recognize the challenges of young children with a play-based learning curriculum. That is a conundrum that is presented because play-based would reference interaction, where we know that interactions are limited. And so these are things that we're working on through our planning as to how it is that we can group students in ways that minimize that kind of contact and address some of the concerns that are raised. We are way far away from ever providing any kind of guarantee. And I don't think that there's any plan that we've seen where a guarantee is ironclad. I can turn it at this point to Superintendent McCoy, who has some more granular information about some of the risk mitigation that has been put in place. But that said, I do hear the concerns that have been raised. We've been hearing them. but I have yet to see or hear of a plan that is completely risk-free, because again, we are reviewing plans that have been implemented in other places to help to inform our practice. So may I turn it to Superintendent McCoy, who might have something to add.
Sure, thank you, Madam Director, and thank you, Madam Chair. And I think that the Director has covered a lot of what I would have said as well. And I think if we think about the different risk mitigation strategies that are part of the plan that has been developed, it includes, again, if we look at it from a health and safety perspective and the hierarchy of controls, we've tried to take an approach where we look at a variety of things. So looking at some of the structural changes that will be happening in schools in terms of, for example, the use of safety measures like plexiglass, like the cohorting that has been put in place in terms of, while we know that the class sizes will be the same, that measures have been put in place to ensure that again, those classes are limited in terms of their contact with each other through the school day, and various practices that have been changed in terms of their time on the yard, the way that they enter and exit the school, some of the physical changes that have been made, like including the directional arrows that will be put in place to ensure that, again, in the common areas, that staff and students are maintaining a physical distance. So again, looking at all of the different precautions that the both Ontario Public Health and the public health agencies have recommended as being the most effective strategies for minimizing risk, have been incorporated into the plan, and we are continuing to look at additional measures. So, for example, looking at barriers that students would have on their desks, particularly, for example, where there are tables in place rather than desks. Looking at maximizing the larger spaces in our schools for classrooms. So, again, given that in some of our schools there will be a space that is available. So again, trying to maximize those spaces wherever possible to accommodate classrooms. As the Director said, there is no way of guaranteeing, but we are certainly making every effort to ensure that we're incorporating the risk mitigation strategies that have been identified, and trying to provide staff with the information that will help them to feel confident in coming back to school. We know that some of the requests that we had received around accommodations from our staff, and I won't disagree with Ms. Gardner that there are many. Some we received before the plan was provided. Again, there was a lot of concern around whether or not PPE would be provided to staff and what kind of PPE. We know now that all of our school-based staff will be provided with not cloth masks, but will have medical or procedural masks, as well as a face shield. And while again, PPE is often the last measure, we are confident that providing that additional PPE is again just another protection for staff. Through the discussions that Employee Wellness and other staff in HR are having with staff, again, trying to provide information so that staff can feel, as I said, more confident in terms of their return. But certainly no question that we have received a number of requests for accommodation based on a number of factors, whether it's the employee's own underlying medical, and looking at accommodations that we can provide to those employees, again, that will allow them to return or that will make changes in other ways. And in some cases, it's related to family status, so childcare or parent responsibilities. And each one of those requests will be reviewed and dealt with on a case-by-case basis in accordance with our obligations under the Human Rights Code, as well as our obligations under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We've been meeting regularly with our Joint Health and Safety Committee and have been considering the recommendations from that committee as well as part of our planning. And so I'm not sure if there are other specifics, but again, trying to provide a holistic approach to all of the different strategies that have been put in place as part of the plan.
Superintendent. Sue, you've got like 10 seconds left on the clock, so I don't know if you have a quick question that you still want to ask or if you want to be put back on the list.
Just where are we going to get the funding? That's all. Where are we going to get the funding for this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if staff want to answer that or if that's more of a rhetorical question.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that through the rest of the conversation, that answer might emerge, but at the moment, with your indulgence, if we could keep it, treat it as somewhat rhetorical, knowing that much of the other pieces of the questions are essentially the bottom line. How are we delivering on those needs?
Okay, thank you, Director. Up next, I have Troy Clough.
Thank you, Chair. I guess first, I just, in relation to the staffing, I'm wondering why $1.1 million that we got for the Supporting Students Fund stretches to 16.6 full-time equivalencies, but the 1.8 million that was allocated for the COVID response money is going to stretch to 45 to 60 full-time equivalencies. If I could just get some clarification around that just to start.
Madam Chair, I'm having a little trouble with my mouse, so I haven't quite got there. I think we haven't gotten into all of the decisions yet, but it will have it's my understanding that the 16.6 under the SSF are required to be full-time positions, which come with a not substantially, with a higher cost when we start to factor in the cost of benefits and the beyond just the basic wage. I think the estimate that we used here was on the assumption that there would be a mix of regular part-time and full-time staff, but I don't have the exact numbers in front of me.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to speak or start with the staffing. We have 147 buildings and the ministry has given the OCDSB enough money, COVID response money, to hire approximately, in my estimation, 30 custodians, if we're using the same benchmarking for the 16.6 full-time equivalencies. This is less than half of what we need in order to carry out the recommendations of the ministry by our estimations. It takes approximately 2 to 3 minutes per classroom to disinfect hard surface touch points, 5 to 6 minutes for an individual washroom, and 10 to 20 minutes for communal washrooms. Some facilities have between 50 to 100 classrooms with multiple washrooms. There's no daytime support beyond the one chief custodian in approximately 120 of our school facilities, leaving all the disinfecting work for the one person who has custody of and is responsible for all facility-related issues throughout the day, and operating in compliance with the regulations that we have to operate in compliance with. Also, there should be an increased expectation for staff absences given the nature of the pandemic and the possibility for required frequent self-isolation periods, in addition to staff burnout as a result of doing this extra cleaning. There's not adequate staffing levels in place to cover off these absences in a way that would ensure enhanced cleaning protocols are being maintained on a daily basis. So in our estimation, it's not going to be feasible or sustainable. I'm getting emails from members now as well who are discussing how many desktops they have to clean per day. Usually in mid-sized facilities like our K-8s, it's over 600, sometimes up to 1,000 desktops. And that's in addition to all the duties that they have to do. And I would argue vehemently that our duties aren't superfluous. The nature of our jobs are nebular and spontaneous. There are some days where we have to address facility concerns that aren't going to enable us to do this disinfecting. So that's a huge concern. And I'm just wondering, like, part of the ask, I guess, in the question is, in the absence of appropriate government funding, will this board seek to budget for an appropriately staffed COVID response complement to meet the recommendations for enhanced cleaning? I guess I'll stop there.
I think, Madam Chair, some of those are questions for the government. The staff recommended budget tried to take into account the additional dollars that were being provided and look at all of the other demands that are being placed on the system, as well as we looked at the staffing. There is no doubt that our staff, and I say this wearing my other hat, Superintendent of Facilities, I am extremely proud of the work that our people do every single day under difficult conditions. And as a result of the work they do, we are not in a situation very often where we have to close a building. I think that one of the risk factors that we run into, and we all are aware of it, that as we go through this circumstance, if we have, when we look at the increased obligations on staff, even with the additional hours that we will be able to provide during the daytime, it may mean that the usual kind of response that would happen in the evening may not be able to kick into place. And it may mean that we will have to look at look a little more closely at the need to close a school for a day. It's not something that we ever take lightly, but I think of one school a couple of years ago where we had a very minor flood from the point of view of damage, but it was only that because that was the focus of the evening staff that night and evening staff from a neighboring building. If we have to do that this time around, we won't be able to have the building properly sanitized the next morning. Those are individual cases, and the budget that we've built is not built around all of those individual cases. And there are some other issues that Mr. Clough has raised that I don't think I want to respond to here in public, because I think they are the topic of ongoing discussions between Human Resources and Labor Relations and the Federation.
Very much, CFO. I appreciate there are some discussions that that at the moment cannot be held in public. I'll move then to.
Sorry, is my time exhausted?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were almost done. I thought you were done. If you have additional questions, you have like 15 seconds left.
Maybe I'll just ask to be placed back on the list. I'd like to make a comment on ventilation as well. Thanks.
Okay, I'll put you back on the list then. Thank you. So we'll go then to Melody Gondik.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, there's a point I wanted to sort of touch on that it hasn't really been addressed. My group, the Educational Support Professional Bargaining Unit, represents most of business and learning technology staff who support the servers, the technology, the devices, the applications, and the training that are used to get the work done across the school board, either at home or within the brick and mortar of OCDSB sites. Supporting staff and students in remote learning, in addition to a typical school year task and activity, is going to require significant additional workload in departments like client services, learning applications, learning support, just as a few examples. So I'm wondering what portion of the $500,000 confirmed in new funding for technologies, excuse me, will be allocated in the budget for staffing, extra staffing, or overtime. Thank you.
Director, CFO.
So I will ask the CFO to pick that up, and perhaps we have Superintendent Lehman with us, who is coordinating the staffing for BNLT with HR. But I'll start with Superintendent or with CFO Carson with that question.
Madam Chair, I hate to do it, but if Ms. Gondik could repeat the tail end of her question. I was having some trouble with my hearing, and the question itself would help again. Thanks.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, CFO, what portion of the $500,000 that's confirmed in the new funding for technologies will be allocated in the budget for extra staffing at BNLT or in overtime?
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I'll turn it over to Superintendent Lehman. I know that he and his team are looking at a number of discussions right now, so I'm not really in a position to comment. I'm not sure just if he's ready at this point or not.
Through you, Madam Chair. So thanks for the question. We have approximately $529,000 that has come through for technology. My understanding related to that is that it is supposed to be used to purchase technology. And so that is something that we'll be seeking, and that is something that we'll be doing. Through our budget and budget proposals, we were able to seek a couple of additional positions within the district and within the department to support the needs in business and learning technologies and to support the district. So those are some of the things that we've done. The other thing that we have been able to do is to bring in our instructional services support technicians into the district to support all of our schools, as opposed to just supporting our secondary schools as well. Certainly, while we recognize that there are some challenges related to many unknowns that are going to be moving ahead and coming to fruition throughout the fall and beyond, we will certainly continue to monitor and work with federations as well as work with our staff around workload. So that's where we are at this point.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I ask a follow-up question? Thank you. So the ISST change is pre-COVID and pre-remote learning, is that right?
Through you, Chair, yes, it is. You're correct.
So my question is, in the face of remote learning during this time, where will the money come from? Or where in the budget will we see additional staffing or overtime allowances for those departments that need it at the BNLT?
So through you, Chair, as I said earlier, we will continue to monitor the workload of our staff in business and learning technology. And a couple of things could occur. One, around some redeployment of some of the tasks that may happen if we see excessive workload with certain individuals. Manager Owens continues to meet regularly with her team managers, as well as our team managers are meeting regularly with our staff, have a pretty good pulse on what is happening in the department, and again, if additional supports are required or if we need to reorganize and rearrange some things, we will certainly make sure that we do that.
Madam Chair, if I may just add to that, we have maintained the current provisions within the budget with respect to staffing for replacements and an overtime provision. Routinely, those dollars are overexpended, and we look to cover them when a department comes forward and says that that's something that they are going to experience. Then we will identify that as an overexpenditure. We will then look to see, obviously, we look to see if there are offsetting savings somewhere else. And depending on the impact of those savings, we might or might not have to implement some of it. But it is something that departments, all departments look at on a routine basis. And I know that we've been having ongoing discussions about how we will respond to some of these changing needs over the next 3 or 4 months.
Thank you, CFO. Melody, do you have further questions, you do still have time on the clock.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll be sending, sorry about that. We'll be sending in more questions for Thursday. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll move then to Trustee Boothby up next.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And I'll just add my voice of thanks to the staff for all the work on this budget document. My first question is, when we talk about the EDP programs and our use of the ECEs, I'm wondering what our plan is, and do we need additional staff for cohorting of the use of our ECEs with both the EDP programs and their use in the kindergarten classroom? So what's our plan around that, and does that require additional staffing?
Through you, Madam Chair, I will turn to Superintendent Dubois. I'm not sure if I'm seeing.
I'm right here. Thank you.
There you are.
Through you, Chair. Regarding the EDP program, right now we're still waiting for the ministry directives in terms of we haven't received the directives from the ministry as of yet. Right now it's a 15-to-1 ratio, and the 15-to-1 ratio is consistent with what we've done in the previous years. And so we have hired we have the EDP in place, and we're following the directives that was shared with the sorry, I'm having problems with my mic.
We can hear you okay.
Sorry, my apologies. So as it stands right now, we are using the same guidelines that we used last year. And we're using the same staffing that we used last year, because we do have quite a few students on the waiting list waiting to come into place. So we started interviewing the ELAs. We're expecting to have the same amount of ELAs as we had last year. And so we're waiting to find out how many parents are interested in coming back. And based on that information, will help us to determine how many more staff we need to hire.
Okay, I appreciate that. I guess my question is more around, so we're talking about cohorting in the classrooms and keeping those cohorts very much intact, so there's less exposure for both our staff and our children. But if we're going to keep our same ECE model, whereas the ECEs are responsible for both our before and after school extended programs and in classroom, how are we going to ensure that the ECEs have the same cohort, or is that in our plan?
To you, Chair, and thank you very much for that question. So what we're doing right now is that EDP programs are working with their schools to determine and to ensuring that the cohorts that we use in the EDP program are consistent with the cohorts within the classrooms. So for example, if you have a kindergarten classroom and you have 6 children in the kindergarten that attend EDP, those children will be in that same bubble together, and they'll be in the same classroom. That is one of the things we're doing to ensure that that cohorting stays consistent.
Okay, so, but we don't know yet if that's going to require us to have additional ECEs. My understanding is our previous model didn't just limit ECEs to the children in the before and after school programs of children that were in their classroom. Is that incorrect thinking?
Okay, can you repeat that question again? I'm not quite clear with your question.
Sure. I think that our model before this year was ECEs that were participating in our before and after school programs didn't necessarily only interact with the children that were in their assigned kindergarten classroom. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. Through you, Mr. Chair. So what we're doing this year is that right now we aren't certain of how many children are returning into the EDP program. We have set up our registration process to ask parents if they're interested in coming back. Parents who are deciding to come back will determine how many more ELAs we need. We'll also have permission to hire additional ECEs if we do require them. And so as it stands right now, until we receive directives from the ministry, we do not have the exact guidelines in terms of how to proceed with the numbers of students in the EDP program.
Okay, thank you for that. So then my follow-on question for that, for the CFO would be then, do we have a certain amount of contingency in our budget for these potentially additional ECEs we need? Because if the ECEs are taking care of children that are in grades 1 through 6, those 1 through 6 kids are not in their kindergarten bubble.
Madam Chair, at this time, we haven't put in a separate contingency for it. We are awaiting discussions have been undertaken between the federal government and the provincial government. There was an announcement the other day that additional funds would be coming to support childcare in its reopening. And as we take a look at what those requirements look like, we will be looking to those funds to support any change we might have to have. I think it's important that, again, we look at the different levels of protection that we are putting in place and the enhanced level of PPE that is required for staff working in the schools and the childcare. So we don't have a specific provision. It's one of the reasons I know that it sometimes sounds like we've spent that $4 million forever, but I think we are awaiting the discussions to be finalized between the feds and the province to see what the allocation of the City of Ottawa will be to support EDP programs in particular, but childcare in general.
Okay, thank you for that. My next question is, I note in Appendix B of the report that we already are anticipating about a $2.7 million deficit in our transportation. But I also note that we're still waiting on OSTA for what our transportation plan will be. And I know that many of our buses, I'm not sure how we're going to socially distance children in those, and I'm not sure how you actually would ever use any partitions. I do understand that we're doing enhanced cleaning. So my question is, how confident are we in that $2.7 million deficit, given that we don't really know what the plan is yet? And are we having additional discussions with the province and feel like the province may come forward with additional monies for additional buses?
Trustee Boothby, your time is up. So just so you're aware, if you want to be if you have further questions, I can put you back on the list.
Okay, I have more questions, but they're related to the questions. So I'll just send those in to staff and then they can be answered for Thursday, but thank you.
Okay, so CFO or Director?
Madam Chair, there were a couple of pieces to that. The province has identified that there will be additional dollars coming to support enhanced cleaning and PPE for bus operators. So we have that part that is partially covered. With respect to other changes, OSTA has been looking at its plan. We have not provided additional dollars at this time because while there may be, depending on the ongoing discussions between OSTA and other consortia with their public health authorities, where additional vehicles might be required, we may not be able to get them just because of the ongoing shortages of equipment and drivers. We've had that discussion with the province. It isn't the case here, but I know of one district where all of their contracts expire this year. None of their operators are going to buy new vehicles in order to serve that market without a guarantee of longer term funding. So it is a constant discussion with the province. I believe they are thinking that some boards are able to take advantage of some of the excess money they had last year when they weren't transporting, depending on the terms of their contracts. But it continues to be a risk area for us. I know when we're working with Ms. Kiriako and her staff over at OSTA, it's an area of concern. Both the superintendent of business at the Catholic Board and I have talked about it. But again, it is one of those areas where we don't want to over budget dollars, where we know we're probably not going to be able to spend them, even if we wanted to, just because of the driver shortage and the equipment restrictions. So we are looking at that plan from OSTA and how it'll be managed, but we don't believe we need to provide additional budget dollars at this time. There are ongoing discussions with the province, though, to make sure everyone understands the impacts on service and the potential impacts to the successful return to school.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, I have Trustee Lyra.
Okay, so I'm going to open with a couple of quick questions. Mike, I heard you say that we're going to be getting our PPE from the ministry stockpile. Disposable masks are predominantly polypropylene, a non-biodegradable plastic that will end up in a landfill. Alberta has promised reusable masks to all staff and students. And so what considerations have been made given the environmental impact of the PPE we will be providing?
Madam Chair, the province has indicated that the masks they will be providing for students will be reusable cloth masks available in different sizes. The equipment that has been acquired from the province, there have been no commitments made as to its biodegradability. I think we will probably find that in several cases, it's what they could acquire. In the areas that we've had some control, it's a minor victory, but one of the reasons we went with a linen service to provide reusable and washable gowns for the 2 CB sites, we did in fact consider the environmental impact of that. And we have been successful with some of the materials that we're obtaining in finding products that are either based on recycled materials as a major component. But I will say that we have all expressed our concern about the fact that much of the disposable masks that are being provided will not, much of it will end up in the landfill.
Okay, thank you for that. I would like to move the staff recommended budget.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lyra.
And I would like, oh, sorry.
No, and I was going to ask if you have any, an opening.
I'd actually like to provide an amendment to the staff recommended budget.
Okay, so you're moving the staff recommended budget with an amendment?
No, I'm going to move the budget and then I'll move an amendment so that the budget's on the floor to begin with.
Okay. So that would be parts A, B, and C?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I'm just saying that the staff recommended budget has parts A, B, and C. So you're moving all 3 parts?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
So I'd like to propose an amendment to the budget. I'd like to propose that, oh, sorry, I've clicked out of my window. That A, $95,976 be removed from the school programs and support budget, which pays for 2 dedicated SROs, and B, that $95,976 be put towards hiring a conflict mediator and a reconciliation officer to be placed at those same schools the SROs were assigned to.
Okay, I don't know if Manager Guthrie has your proposed language. Okay, I do see.
I think
Yes,
it's popping up on the screen.
it is on the screen. Would you like an introduction?
I would. Okay, so I don't know how many of you have had a chance to read How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's the book we were gifted by the director as summer reading. It starts from the premise that racist shouldn't be a pejorative, but a description of an action or a choice that an individual makes. That a person can do a thing that supports racist policies one day and something that doesn't the next. I'm sure you've all known someone who you would say isn't a racist person, but who has said something that caught you out of left field because it was a racist statement. To challenge racism, we must constantly be looking for ways to combat the ingrained systemic aspects. It is not enough to be colorblind, because in a colorblind world, we are not actively addressing the systems of prejudice that exist. And as an organization that has publicly committed to combating anti-Black racism, we need to be actively challenging those systems. We know the police have a racism problem. Anyone who thinks otherwise is deluding themselves. And knowing that, we still choose to hire 2 police officers out of funds intended for students' education to be in our most marginalized schools full-time, schools that are disproportionately Black and Indigenous. We are contributing to the over-policing of those communities, and in doing so, we are upholding systemic racism at our school board. We are asking high school kids, all of whom will have seen the videos and read the news articles of people who look just like them, people from their communities dying at the hands of police. Not just here, not just in the States, but here in Canada. Those kids will be hypervigilant, they will be stressed by police presence, and we are asking them to juggle additional mental health aspects that we are not asking our non-marginalized students to juggle. And that is systemic racism. In addition to the wider push from around the world, we have heard loud and clear from both our previous student trustees and the police, from both of our previous student trustees, that the police are not trusted by many of our students. They even support the suspension of the SRO program so strongly they put it in their end-year report. We have heard from the Justice from Abdi Coalition. We have heard from our wonderful delegation this evening. We have ever-mounting evidence that a significant portion of our school community doesn't want police in schools. It likely isn't a majority, but it's important that we listen to everyone, not just those who look like us. This motion is the first step in a broader process that must happen to begin to rebuild trust with the Black community, the Indigenous community, and other communities that have suffered at the hands of police. Because when we say we trust police enough to hire more, we are accepting the treatment of those communities face at the hands of police in our schools.
Thank you, Trustee Evans. I would like to ask that people please take down your hands, because it's hard to know if any of you wish to speak to this particular amendment. So I just need to see who wishes to speak to this particular amendment. The others, please lower your hands. Okay, so I believe, sorry, Melody, I still have your hand up. I don't know, thank you. Okay, so I've had Trustee Lyra speak. Trustee Scott, I have you, but I don't know if your hand is up from previously.
I did wish to speak to the amendment, and then I'd like to stay on the list for the main motion as well.
I've got you still on the list for the main motion. I've got everybody's names down for the main motion. So I just need to check. So I've got Trustee Scott, Campbell, student trustee, and pardon me, Joy, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, if it's Liu, and I don't want to get that incorrect. If I do, please correct me. I have Trustee Bell, Trustee Penny, and Trustee Boothby. So I'll start with you, Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my first question is whether we could please have a comment from staff. I'm not entirely sure what a conflict mediator and a reconciliation officer specifically involve in terms of the nature of the work that they would do in schools, and whether from the point of view of staff, this would cover off some of the kinds of work that we have historically thought that our dedicated SROs were involved in, or if it would be substantially different work.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I will start that, and Associate Director Reynolds is poised to engage with this particular question. To the question about the new positions, I would submit that while it is that we may be looking at the trustees are within their prerogative to make a budget adjustment. The hiring of specific new roles, I would suggest, would come with some research as to how it is that those would be the appropriate roles. I do know that we are currently in a position where the Safe Schools policies and procedures are being reviewed. And we also know that as a part of our strategic action plan, there is a focus on revisiting and rekindling restorative approaches to discipline and engagement. And so whether or not it is in fact those two positions that we would be looking at, or another kind of engagement to meet the goal. And so the goal of including restoration and restorative approaches is certainly one that I know that Superintendent Farish is embracing as a part of the review of Safe Schools as well as well-being. From the point of view of the role of the SRO, I will turn that to AD Reynolds, as he has historically been involved with this particular role. AD Reynolds.
Sure, thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. In the province of Ontario, we have policy direction that when something happens in the school of a criminal nature, and unfortunately sometimes they do, where students are perhaps the victim of a crime, or where a school has received a threat, there's a list of things. We are required to call the police, as we should. That role cannot be substituted or delegated to someone else. We've seen some very unfortunate situations where, again, students or entire schools have sometimes received threats, or a student has been a victim, and we need police support in order to address that. We're fortunate enough in the city to have school resource officer generally respond to those calls. They are more experienced officers typically than general patrol officers. They certainly have received some specific training in school board policies, student learning profiles, the Education Act, and are able to more often than not respond in a more appropriate manner than an officer on general patrol may be able to do so. Additionally, since those two priority SRO officers out of the entire complement of 24 for the city, so there are 24 school resource officers for all 350 schools in the city, those two serve Gloucester High School and Ridgemont High School and their feeder schools. It does so happen that Gloucester High School and Ridgemont both have additional staff in terms of social workers to help with conflict mediation and support, as well as student counselors, a unique position that is housed in each one of those schools, also often working on peer-to-peer relationships and conflict resolution. And furthermore, those two schools a few years ago, Rideau High School prior to Gloucester, were a focus for intensive restorative practices training for the staff. So they have a disproportionately high number of teachers that have some experience or qualification in restorative practices at those two sites already. So in short, I would really want to speak with the principals and others in the building first before offering comment on whether or not further mediation expertise is what is required. But even if we were to put those people in place, unfortunately, things do happen in our schools and our school communities that do require a police response.
Thank you for that. I'm still a little bit at a loss here. If we remove the funding for these two positions, would that mean then that there would not be any SRO support for those schools, or would it mean that the remaining SRO support would be spread to include those schools in addition to the other schools that are already covered? I guess the question really is whether we need a dedicated SRO for those two schools, or whether we should rely on the overall SRO for all of the schools in the city and use some additional other resources in the school to address any school specific needs. And in that case, I'm still not at all clear on exactly what would be entailed in terms of a conflict mediator or a reconciliation person, because I just don't know what the job descriptions of those kinds of things are relative to social workers and child and youth workers and other people that we have involved in our schools in helping to mediate situations and ensure that we are looking at restorative practices. So if staff have any further comment in terms of clarifying just what that would mean in terms of the SRO connections relative to, and anything else in terms of what those school needs might be.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So as mentioned, the total complement at this time of SROs is 24 for the 350 schools. In all likelihood, if we were to discontinue support, Ottawa Police may choose to then keep, that would drop the full complement to 23. Ottawa Police may choose to keep the 23rd. It's really a matching arrangement right now in that we fund one of the two and they fund the other. In fact, we fund a portion of the one and then they fund the two. That would then mean we'd have either 22 or 23 instead of 24 SROs supporting all the schools. In all likelihood, Ottawa Police would continue to support those two sites with SROs, as we would hope. One of the reasons that this program was put in place, and it was an initiative of a previous associate director who'd been a principal at Ridgemont, he felt that a lot could be done in order to better improve the relationships between police and as an important partner and the students in the school. And that was half the reason for bringing in the dedicated SRO program, so that they wouldn't be spending all of their time or a lot of their time dealing with the responsive side of police business, but instead they could invest more of their time in developing relationships in those schools and their feeder schools with the students, the community, and the parents. And that is a lot of what those two dedicated SROs do. To date, Ottawa Police has been deliberate in its selection of those two SROs. I can think of several of the SROs that have served those two committees off the top of my head. They have been Indigenous, they have been New Canadians, several have been Black, several identify as LGBTQ2S+, and other identities that actually well represent some of the diversity seen in those two schools. So yes, I'm sure Ottawa Police will continue to provide SRO support for all of our schools, but it would probably mean that proportionally it would be of a slightly more responsive and typical police business nature. Again, things happen that do require a call to police, and they would be less able to undertake some of the proactive measures that they currently do. In terms of what the job descriptions for those other roles might be, I don't know. They would be new to us, and so it would require some thinking.
Thank you. I don't need any more time now. I need to think.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. Next is Trustee Campbell.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. So Trustee Scott explored a lot of the territory I wanted to explore. I have, I guess, one follow-up in the same vein, if I may, likely from the Associate Director. Do I take it then that the reason that we have an extra, effectively, we're deciding to pay for an extra SRO complement in order to not to do typical SRO things like the other 22 do, but to specifically work on, is it only, I guess, police student relationship building, or is there anything else? Is that the sum total of, I mean, they don't just walk the halls as ambassadors. I guess I'm trying to figure out what do they do, and do they in fact carry open weapons, and or do they present effectively as staff and office workers and that kind of thing, since they're embedded full time in those schools?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. And I don't want to suggest that the other school resource officers don't engage in relationship building and that kind of work. That is one of the main tenets of the entire SRO program. so that we do have officers trying to spend as much time as possible in schools, doing such things as developing relationships, conflict resolution, providing support to students that would not typically be things you would get a police officer to respond to do. So that is why the SRO program does exist in the city, and to support the police school board protocol, our local version, as best as possible. The reason behind the idea of the two dedicated was to provide that much more SRO time to undertake those things, particularly in underserved communities. So a lot of their time is spent walking the halls as ambassadors and visiting classrooms, participating in an open gym, just being a presence in the school. Not typically undertaking, I don't have the stats available, and we could certainly arrange to get more information to you, or perhaps even have a presentation from Ottawa Police Service about the type of things that those two officers do that do fall outside of the range of responding to calls for service because there's been an incident. So again, we would continue to have police service and support in those schools. We would just lose some of those other proactive relationship building measures that was really the impetus behind the partnership, where we would fund one position and Ottawa Police would match that with another for those two high priority urban priority school communities.
Right, thank you. And do we have any idea whether, to what extent they do effectively in intelligence gathering on the student community in terms of profiles development? Or is that not something that they do?
That's not so as you know, I've been involved with the SRO program quite intimately since 2010 when I first moved into the Safe Schools role, and I've been in that role since. Intelligence gathering specifically has not come up as a role or a topic or a conversation that I've had with them. I'd have to ask that question. I've talked about many aspects and been involved as school staff is often involved in the training of the SROs at the beginning of the school year. That has not been one that has come up. I would have to ask that question of the Ottawa Police Service.
Fair enough, and this is all good. I guess from my perspective, and perhaps I'll close here, hear what other people have to say. I'm thinking we probably do need maybe a full report, give staff a chance, maybe approach the Ottawa police officers, maybe have that presentation and understand better exactly what services we may be losing. Maybe it's a good trade to do that, but perhaps also, and I believe this may be where Trustee Lyra wanted eventually anyway to head, to looking at our involvement with the entire SRR program, and not necessarily just with the 0.8 of a police officer, that we happen to pay for. So I guess my initial thinking here is that we need to, this is an absolutely valid thing to look at, but we need to look at it carefully, and not just at maybe one or two positions, but really our orientation and implementation of the entire program in a more careful way. But I'll listen to the rest of the debate. I am considering perhaps referring this amendment, however. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell. One of your questions was not actually answered by AD Reynolds, and that was, which I think was pertinent, and sorry to intervene, but the one question was related to whether or not those two positions, actually whether they carry weapons.
Oh.
And that actually wasn't answered.
Thank you.
So yes, good point. They are uniformed officers, and there are, again, I'm not as familiar with them as those policies at Ottawa Police, but if a uniformed officer is going to undertake any kind of police work, they do need to have their use of force options, which does include their firearm with them. It's an officer safety and community safety protocol, from what I understand.
Thank you for answering that. So next is Student Trustee Liu.
Hi. So I guess my first question is the two like OCDSB funded SROs, are they specifically responsible for relationship building for Gloucester and Ridgemount? That's just my first short question that I would like to hear.
So through you, Madam Chair, there are the two dedicated officers. One is funded by the OCDSB, one is funded by Ottawa Police, and they do support just Gloucester High School, Ridgemont High School, and their feeder schools.
Thank you, through the chair. So would there be, like, I know you meant, through the chair, I know you mentioned that that the OPP may choose to like drop the number to like 22 or 23 SROs. Do we think that would have, do you think that would have a significant impact on like on the ability of like on the ability of like the SRO program to like function, for example?
Through you, Madam Chair, obviously that might be a question better sent to the Ottawa Police Service. Though from my perspective, you're right. You know, if the complements drop by 1 or 2 officers, it's not a significant percent. I think the impact would probably be most keenly felt in those 2 schools, or those 2 communities or families of schools, where you know, I do believe they have experienced some very positive interactions with their school resource officers. They would then just revert to more of a regular amount of service that would be received from any secondary school and their feeder schools.
Thank you. And so what I will say is that like I am inclined to believe that defunding these 2 SROs would not have a negative impact on these 2 schools. However, I am concerned about the fact that I think we need to do like direct consultations with students in like Gloucester and Ridgemont to understand their experiences with these SROs and whether this relationship building has actually been effective. Like, for example, in Prestith and Gannabout's biannual report that they presented in June, the recommendation was specifically that they want there to be data collection and to be and they want like students to sort of speak about their experiences, so to have that qualitative and quantitative mix. So my only concern with this amendment is that I am concerned about the amount of consultation we would need in order to judge the impact that passing this amendment would have on students. And I think that, again, like student voice plays a crucial role in whether defunding these 2 SROs would have a positive or negative impact on these schools. And I think that additionally, like building that by speaking to students at Gloucester and Ridgemont, we can also specifically ask, like, talk to students, like, is your preferred solution to remove these 2 SROs completely, or would you prefer to like somehow allocate like shifts so that it's mostly, for example, like police officers of color who are serving these schools, or that there are no firearms being held, whether that's possible. So I think that's just sort of the last comment I will make. I give the rest of my time to the chair. Thank you.
And you don't need to give me any time. So I appreciate that. We'll give, and don't worry about always using the protocol of, you know, through the chair. That is the protocol we generally use, is when you ask a question, you're asking it through the chair. But if you miss it once or twice, it's not a big deal. So. Okay, so on to the next speaker. I have Trustee Bill.
Great, thank you. Through you, Chair, I would like to express my gratitude again to Trustee Liu. Thank you very much for bringing up the report, the Student Trustee Biannual Report that was written by former trustees Gannabout Gagne and Prasith Wijiwera, because I think what they did in that report is clearly laid out, and from the moment that I read the words that they wrote regarding the SRO, I thought to myself, yes, this is something that we should take. This should not just be filed away in a report. So Trustee Liu, thank you for raising that. Now, I'm not sure if I can propose an amendment and actually say out loud that I am doubtful that the proposal that Lyra has put forth is going to be passed this evening. However, I feel as if I know that we have to act now. I know that police presence in schools is a problem. And so currently right now for marginalized communities. So I would like to put an amendment, and I don't know if it is too much of an amendment, that it is not an amendment. So I'm going to try here. Nicole Guthrie has my proposed amendment to Trustee Lyra's Evans proposal to remove the funding to the 2 SROs.
So you're proposing a sub-amendment to the amendment?
Yes.
Okay, we'll just wait to get it up on screen share. And can you, Trustee Bell, could you please walk us through what the sub-amendment specifically
states? What I am asking for the amendment to state are the words that were used by our former trustees who felt very strongly about this. It is actually word for word from their report, which is that the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board pause the program and conduct a review of the program and the impact, both positive and negative, that it has on the student population.
Sorry, we're not seeing it on the screen.
Madam Chair, a couple of things. One, I believe we've lost Manager Guthrie due to a power outage. So Manager Owens is posting the information on the screen, so bear with us as we work through. I haven't had the opportunity to see the proposed, what I believe is a sub-amendment by Trustee Bell, if I'm following correctly. And I am not clear if the sub-amendment is adding to Trustee Lyra's amendment, or if it's replacing the language.
That's what I was
it
trying
might be a different motion.
That's what I was trying to ascertain myself, was whether it was a sub-amendment of the amendment.
It was ultimately it was replacing the language with the amendment that, or the proposal that was put forth in the trustee report to the specific
so it
issue.
was a separate, so it wasn't actually sub-amendment. It was a full replacement of, in order to entertain the amendment that you are referring to then, Trustee Bell, we would be required to first vote on this amendment, I believe. Trustee Scott, you would know procedure better than I.
Well, I was actually just considering putting my hand up on a point of order.
Please do.
Here, because we are dealing here with the budget recommendation, and the budget recommendation is about the money. So the only piece of Lyra's proposal that comes in here is the piece about the money. The piece about pausing the program would, I believe, be a policy type decision, it bearing on the budget. The only piece of it that's connected to the budget is this particular 95,000 or 97,000 or whatever the amount is. And so I think that as a budget amendment, what Trustee Bell is proposing would be out of order. So I'm asking for the chair to rule.
However, I'm asking for the specific funding to be paused for this year. So that is a specific budget request.
So you said for the SRO program in general, not for these 2 positions.
That's what I'm trying to.
The only ones that there's any money attached to.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to ascertain as well. And so, sorry, Trustee Campbell, I do see you.
If I may just jump in, I think perhaps along the
Well, you can't just jump in unless you have a point of order.
I thought you were recognizing me. I wanted to speak to the point of order suggested.
Okay, I'll allow it if you are speaking to the point of order specifically.
Whoops, there we go. Yes, along the lines of what I think Trustee Bill suggested, I think it could be repaired so that it became a budget motion. Basically putting the 95,000, whatever it is, into a reserve account pending the review of the SR program, or words to that effect.
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Okay.
perhaps I can help. Manager Guthrie has
that
been
would be
able-
great.
Manager Guthrie has sent me the proposed language. As I understand it, the proposed language is that the OCDSB pause the program, which would need clarification, and conduct a review of the program and the impact, both positive and negative, that it has on student populations. So if that is intended to mean the SRO program in and of itself, it is a broader policy motion, as Trustee Scott indicated, which is consistent with the advice we gave to Trustee Lyra when she first approached staff for assistance in drafting her motion. Trustee Lyra's motion is in order. This is not an amendment to the motion that is currently on the floor. So as the chair, you can make a decision if you want to allow it as a substitution, in which case I think Trustee Lyra would have to be willing to withdraw. And then I think there's a broader question about whether or not it's in order or not. And so if it were going to be a sub amendment to the main motion, then it would be pause the funding for the two specific positions for the current year, and while the district review, or something to that effect. But it has to get back to the specific points in the trustee motion. And I hate to tell you this as well, but it is now 10:30.
10:30, and I recognize that we need to do a vote. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Executive Officer. I do see the time, and I suspect we are not going to get through our full speaker list this evening unless everyone has a 1-minute question and we have a 1-minute answer. So let's take the 10:30 vote. All those in favor of continuing this evening past 10:30? Okay, I do not have enough. Oh, I still don't think I have enough of those present to continue. I have 5.
Can I ask a question about voting procedure for extending meetings?
Sure.
Do student trustees, oh, okay, sorry, never mind, okay, never mind.
No, we can tell you what the procedure is. We have to have a majority of
Trustee Lyra helped me answer the question, so.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I have 6, and I can raise my hand. So we do have, I believe, sufficient numbers. Lynn, can you help me out here to make sure?
Madam Chair, I don't believe that the student trustees do get a vote on this.
I don't either. Oh, yeah. So, okay. Good point.
That's
so
correct.
You can't count student trustee Liu's hand.
So we only have 5 trustees, 6 including myself, which would
We're
mean
only 11, 6 passes.
You still need 2/3.
We need 2/3 though at 10:30. So we don't have sufficient numbers. So we'll have to adjourn the meeting at this point in the agenda. Apologies to folks. I think Thursday we'll make sure that we do try to actually keep on time. We do have, still significant number of people who wish to ask first time questions on the main motion. We also have a list for the amendment that's on the table. And we've not yet dealt with the question of Trustee Bell's whether or not it's considered a sub amendment. So I will need some advice from staff between now and Thursday evening's meeting. So at this point, we are adjourned until Thursday at 7 p.m. So thank you all very much for participating this evening.
Madam Chair.
All your great questions.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Rob Kerwin. Can you tell me what the order of activity will be on Thursday? Because I don't have any questions or observations to make on behalf of SEAC with regard to a motion or an amendment or a sub-amendment. The SEAC can't obviously vote, but there are a number of items that, as trustees had alluded to, they'd like to hear from the non-voting representatives, and SEAC happens to be one of them. And I have a number of issues to raise that I guess I'm going to have to wait until Thursday, but at this point in time, what will be the order of events?
Yeah, so thanks very much for the question, Rob. The way it will go is because we do have an amendment. We have the staff recommended budget motion on the floor. It's received an amendment. We now have potentially an additional amendment. So we'll first have to deal with Trustee Bill's sub-amendment and determine whether or not that's in order. If it is, we'll debate that. If it's, depending on where things go with that, we may then go back to Trustee Lyra's amendment.
Right.
And then once that business is being dealt with, we will go back to the main motion and the speakers list associated with the main motion.
Okay, and that's fair. And I did sort of appreciate that that would be the order of events. What I am concerned with, and before you asked everybody to drop their hands who were not speaking to the main motion and the amendment to the motion, there were a number of non-voting folks with their hands identified as being.
I have all of that noted.
Okay, thank you.
So I have, I currently have, just so folks are aware, the next person on the speakers list once we deal with Trustee Bill's time, as she still has 1.5 minutes left on the clock. We have Trustee Penny, and then Boothby, Ms. Granum, and Trustee Ellis. We may have additional people to speak on the amendment. Once we get back to the main motion, I have Ms. Kirky, yourself, Rob, Ms. Handela, Trustee Scott, Trustee Huff, and then back to second time speakers if there are no further first time.
Right. I guess.
So we do have a number of people that still are wanting to speak.
Right. Okay. I'm in your good hands on this one. Just be aware that SEAC has some items it wishes to raise Thursday.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm only entertaining these questions now because these are procedural questions.
Absolutely.
Usually,
Absolutely.
our meetings, once they adjourn, they're adjourned.
Yep. Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Have a good evening and see you Thursday.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.